London, 1816. The grand ballroom of Grey Haven Estate glittered under the light of 1,000 candles. Lady Eleanor Vance adjusted her pearl hairpin, a gift from her father, and took a deep breath. She had survived the past year without Duke Alaric, a painful, necessary crucible, and now she would prove it. Lady Eleanor. Lady Rothel beamed, taking her hands. How delightful to see you looking so well. Your gown is absolutely exquisite. Eleanor smiled with practiced ease. Thank you for your kind invitation, Lady Rothel. Your annual spring ball is always the highlight of the season. The pale blue silk of Eleanor's gown rustled softly as she moved through the crowd. Several familiar faces nodded respectfully. The music swelled, a Mozart piece she recognized from happier days, as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman. Might I have the honor of this dance, Lady Eleanor? She turned to find Mr. Julian Croft, the second son of the Earl of Ashworth, offering his hand. His kind eyes and genuine smile had been a steady comfort in recent months. With pleasure, Mr. Croft, she replied, setting down her untouched champagne. As they joined the other couples for the quadrille, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had survived. The woman who had once wept until dawn, who had barely eaten for weeks, who had refused to leave her chambers, that fragile creature was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had learned to protect herself. You seem in good spirits this evening, Julian commented as they moved through the steps of the dance. I find I have much to be thankful for, Eleanor replied. She had just completed a graceful turn when the music faltered momentarily, or perhaps it was only her perception of it. A curious hush fell over one section of the ballroom, followed by excited whispers. The Duke of Beaumont had arrived. Eleanor's fingers tightened involuntarily around Julian's hand, but her expression remained serene. Alaric stood tall and imposing in the entryway, his dark evening attire impeccable, his chestnut hair slightly longer than fashion dictated, and on his arm, resplendent in crimson silk and diamonds, was the Countess Isolde Blackwood, beautiful, worldly, and precisely everything Eleanor was not. Are you unwell? Julian asked, noticing her momentary stillness, merely a passing chill. Eleanor lied, forcing herself to continue the dance. She would not look at Alaric. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her falter. But fate had other plans. As the dance ended and Julian led her from the floor, Eleanor found herself directly in Alaric's line of sight. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and everything around them seemed to blur. The music faded. The chatter dimmed. For one breathless moment, there was only the two of them. His face, that perfectly composed, aristocratic face, showed a flash of something unmistakable. Pain? Regret? Eleanor couldn't be certain. What she knew was that her carefully constructed defenses threatened to crumble. With every ounce of dignity she possessed, Eleanor turned away. She accepted another dance invitation from Lord Weston this time. She smiled. She conversed. She pretended that seeing Alaric had not affected her in the slightest, but her heart, her traitorous heart, thundered in her chest. Alaric remained rooted to the spot, the Countess's words washing over him unheard. Eleanor looked different, more poised, more confident. She wore her golden brown hair swept up in a more sophisticated style, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. But it was the light in her eyes, a light that had once been solely for him, now directed at others, that struck him like a physical blow. Your Grace, the Countess Isolde Blackwood said sharply, recalling his attention. I believe you were about to fetch me some refreshment. Of course, he said automatically, though his gaze lingered on Eleanor's retreating figure. Forgive me, Isolde. As he made his way toward the refreshment table, Alaric was accosted by Lord Rothel. Beaumont, capital to see you. Wasn't certain you'd grace us with your presence this season. Alaric managed a thin smile. I've been occupied with estate matters. Yes, heard you've been improving the tenant cottages at Beaumont Court. Unusual interest, but commendable. Lord Rothel lowered his voice. I see the Vance girl is here. Thought that might interest you. Alaric stiffened. Lady Eleanor and I are merely acquaintances. Lord Rothel's eyebrows rose skeptically. Indeed, the impression last season was rather different. Well, water under the bridge, I suppose. She seems to have captured young Croft's attention these days. Alaric's jaw tightened as he watched Julian Croft return to Eleanor's side, offering her a glass of punch. The easy familiarity between them sent a surge of something dark through his veins. "If you'll excuse me," he said curtly, leaving Lord Rothel mid-sentence. Across the room, Lady Clara Vance, Eleanor's younger sister, approached with wide eyes. "Eleanor," she whispered urgently, "he's here, and he keeps looking at you." "Let him look," Eleanor replied, smoothing her gloves. "It matters not to me." Clara frowned. "You don't mean that. Not after everything." "Especially after everything." Eleanor's voice was still wrapped in silk. "Now tell me of your dance with Mr. Sinclair. I noticed he seemed quite attentive." As the evening progressed, Eleanor and Alaric orbited each other like celestial bodies, never coming closer than propriety demanded, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. She laughed at Julian Croft's jokes. He escorted the Countess around the room. Both performed their roles flawlessly, until the Countess deliberately steered Alaric toward the corner where Eleanor stood with Clara and Julian. "Lady Eleanor," the Countess purred. "How delightful to see you again! It's been an age." Eleanor curtsied perfectly. "Your Grace, I trust you're enjoying the season immensely." The Countess's smile was predatory as she placed her hand possessively on Alaric's arm. "The Duke has been kind enough to escort me to several events. Haven't you, Alaric?" The use of his Christian name, a deliberate display of intimacy, hung in the air between them. Alaric cleared his throat. "Lady Eleanor." "Lady Clara." His voice, deep and familiar, sent an unwelcome shiver down Eleanor's spine. "I hope you are both well." "Exceedingly," Eleanor replied, her gaze level. "Mr. Croft has been regaling us with tales of his recent journey to Italy. Most fascinating." Julian, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Your Grace, I believe we've not been formally introduced. Julian Croft." As the men exchanged pleasantries, Clara whispered in Eleanor's ear, "Breathe, dear sister. You look as though you might shatter." Indeed, Eleanor felt as though she might. The proximity to Alaric, his familiar scent, the timbre of his voice, threatened to unravel her composure. "If you'll excuse me," she said suddenly, "I find I need some air." Before anyone could protest, Eleanor moved swiftly through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The cool night air was a blessed relief as she stepped outside, her hands gripping the stone balustrade. "Fool," she whispered to herself. "Absolute fool." A year of healing, of rebuilding, of convincing herself she was indifferent, and one look from him had set her heart racing. One proximity had made her flee. She did not hear the terrace door open behind her. "Eleanor?" She closed her eyes briefly at the sound of Alaric's voice, then, composing herself, she turned. "Your Grace," she said coolly, "I believe your companion will be wondering where you've gone." Alaric took a step closer. "I needed to speak with you." After a year of silence, Eleanor laughed bitterly. "I think not." "Please," he said, and something in his tone, a vulnerability she had never heard before, made her pause. "One moment. That's all I ask." Eleanor regarded him wearily. In the moonlight, his features seemed more pronounced. The high cheekbones, the strong jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes. He looked tired, she realized. Strained. "What could you possibly have to say that would interest me?" she asked. Alaric ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. I wanted to inquire after your well-being." "My well-being?" Eleanor's composure slipped. "You abandoned me without a word, after weeks of courtship. You made me believe." She stopped herself, unwilling to reveal how deeply he had hurt her. "My well-being is no longer your concern, Your Grace." "I know I have no right to ask," he said quietly, "but I have thought of you often. How flattering," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I, however, have endeavored not to think of you at all." Alaric flinched as if struck. "You seem changed." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "I am." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken words and buried pain. "The Countess appears a suitable match for you," Eleanor said finally. "I wish you every happiness." "Isolde and I are not engaged," Alaric said quickly. "Despite what society assumes, it hardly matters to me either way." Eleanor gathered her skirts, preparing to return to the ballroom. "If you'll excuse me, I believe Mr. Croft will be wondering where I've gone." As she moved to pass him, Alaric gently caught her wrist. The touch, their first in a year, sent a jolt through them both. "Eleanor, please." His voice was rough with emotion. "I made a terrible mistake." She looked down at where his fingers encircled her wrist, then back to his face. "Yes," she agreed softly. "You did." With that, she pulled away and returned to the bright lights and music of the ballroom, leaving Alaric alone in the darkness with his regrets. The day after Lady Rothel's ball, Eleanor sat in the morning room of the Vance townhouse, absently stirring her tea, as Clara read aloud from the latest society column. Lady Eleanor Vance, whose mysterious withdrawal from society last season prompted much speculation, has returned triumphantly to the London scene. Her elegant appearance at Lady Rothel's ball drew many admirers, including the eligible Mr. Julian Croft. Clara paused dramatically. Also in attendance was the Duke of Beaumont, escorting the widowed Countess of Blackwood. Observers noted a curious tension when these former acquaintances encountered one another. "Vultures, the lot of them," Eleanor muttered, setting down her cup with more force than intended. Clara folded the newspaper. "You must admit, your encounter with the Duke provides delicious fodder for gossip. I would prefer not to be discussed at all. An impossible wish for the daughter of an earl, particularly one as lovely as yourself." Clara studied her sister thoughtfully. "What did he say to you on the terrace?" Eleanor sighed. "Nothing of consequence." "It didn't look like nothing." Clara leaned forward. "You were pale as a ghost when you returned." Before Eleanor could respond, the butler entered with a silver salver. "A delivery for you, Lady Eleanor." Upon the salver rested a small package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, accompanied by a sealed note. Eleanor recognized Alaric's handwriting immediately. Elegant, decisive strokes that had once adorned love letters she'd treasured. "Shall I open it for you?" Clara asked eagerly. "No," Eleanor replied, quickly taking the package. "That will be all, Wilson. Thank you." Once the butler had departed, Eleanor broke the seal on the note. "Eleanor, words cannot express my regret for the pain I have caused you. Please accept this token, not as recompense, which I know is impossible, but as a symbol of a truth I was too cowardly to acknowledge. Yours, though I have no right to be, Alaric." With trembling fingers, Eleanor unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound volume of Wordsworth's poetry, the same collection they had discussed during their walks in Hyde Park. Inside, a pressed forget-me-not marked a particular poem they had once read together beneath an ancient oak tree. "How terribly romantic," Clara sighed, reading over Eleanor's shoulder. "Will you see him?" Eleanor closed the book firmly. "Certainly not. A paltry gift changes nothing. But Eleanor, please." Eleanor's voice was strained. "He had his chance. He made his choice. I will not be made a fool of twice." Yet, despite her words, Eleanor carefully placed the book in her desk drawer, rather than discarding it. That afternoon, a visitor was announced. Not Alaric, as part of Eleanor had feared and hoped, but Julian Croft. "Mr. Croft." Eleanor greeted him in the drawing-room. "What a pleasant surprise." Julian bowed. "Lady Eleanor, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Clara and I were just discussing plans for the Ashworth's musical tomorrow evening." Julian hesitated, then said, "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you privately, if I may." Eleanor glanced at Clara, who rose with a knowing smile. "I suddenly recall urgent correspondence that requires my attention, if you'll excuse me." Once they were alone, Julian approached Eleanor with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I'll come directly to the point, Lady Eleanor. Over these past months, I've developed a deep admiration for you. Your grace, your intelligence, your resilience, all have impressed me greatly." Eleanor felt a flutter of panic. "Mr. Croft, please." "Please," he said gently. "Allow me to continue. I understand you suffered a disappointment last season. I have no wish to press unwelcome attentions upon you, but I would be honored if you would consider me as someone who might in time earn your affection." Eleanor regarded him with genuine fondness. Julian Croft was everything Alaric was not: steady, transparent, uncomplicated. A sensible woman would accept his suit without hesitation. "You do me great honor, Mr. Croft," she said carefully, "and I value your friendship immensely. But I must be honest, my heart is not yet. That is, I cannot in good conscience encourage hopes I'm uncertain I can fulfill." Rather than disappointment, Julian's expression showed understanding. "I appreciate your candor. I ask only that you not dismiss the possibility entirely." "I would never wish to mislead you," Eleanor said, touched by his maturity. "Then we shall continue as friends," Julian said, "and perhaps with time." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. As he took his leave, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions. Julian offered safety, respect, affection. Why then did the prospect of accepting him fill her with such melancholy? Her heart still yearned for answers from the man who had shattered it, a man now returned, cloaked in mystery, and accompanied by a rival. Later that evening, Lord Vance summoned Eleanor to his study, a rare occurrence that immediately put her on alert. "Father," she said, entering the book-lined room where he sat behind an imposing mahogany desk. "You wish to see me?" The Earl, a distinguished man in his early 60s, gestured for her to sit. "I've had a visitor today," he said without preamble. "The Duke of Beaumont." Eleanor stiffened. "Indeed, he requested a private audience, most unusual given the circumstances." "And what did His Grace want?" Eleanor asked, struggling to keep her voice even. The Earl studied his daughter carefully. "He asked for my permission to court you properly. Said there had been a misunderstanding last season that he wished to rectify." "A misunderstanding?" Eleanor repeated incredulously. "Is that what he calls it?" "I reminded him that he had forfeited any claim to your attention when he disappeared without explanation." The Earl's tone was severe. "I also informed him that Mr. Croft has shown serious interest in you." Eleanor's cheeks flushed. "Julian spoke to you?" "He did." "A respectable young man with excellent prospects." The Earl leaned forward. "Eleanor, I have never interfered in your choice of husband. Your happiness is paramount to me. But I would be remiss as a father if I did not caution you against trusting Beaumont again." "You need not worry," Eleanor assured him. "I have no intention of allowing the Duke to dupe me a second time." The Earl nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I told him as much. However, Eleanor prompted. "He was most insistent, said he would not rest until he had explained himself to you fully." The Earl sighed. "I confess I have never seen a man, particularly one of his station, so determined. He mentioned something about circumstances beyond his control, though he refused to elaborate to me." Eleanor's heart betrayed her with a traitorous leap. Circumstances beyond his control. Could there truly be a reason beyond simple abandonment? "What did you tell him?" "That the decision was yours to make." The Earl's expression softened. "You are no longer a child, Eleanor. I trust your judgment, even if I fear for your heart." The following evening at the Ashworths' musical, Eleanor was acutely aware of being the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations. News of both Julian's interest and Alaric's visit to her father had evidently spread throughout society. She was seated between Clara and their cousin, Lady Seraphina Croft, when a hush fell over the gathering. Alaric had entered the music room, alone this time, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. "Goodness," Seraphina whispered, "the Duke without his Countess. How unexpected." "She is not his Countess," Eleanor whispered back, then immediately regretted revealing her knowledge. Seraphina's eyes widened with interest. "Indeed." One might be forgiven for assuming otherwise given their constant companionship. "I neither know nor care about the Duke's arrangements," Eleanor said firmly, but she could not help noticing that Alaric stood apart from the other guests, his posture tense, his gaze occasionally seeking hers across the room. When their eyes inevitably met, he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. Eleanor merely turned her attention back to the young lady at the pianoforte. After the performance, as guests mingled during refreshments, Eleanor found herself cornered by the Countess Isolde Blackwood. "Lady Eleanor," the Countess said, her voice honeyed, but her eyes sharp. "I've been hoping for a moment alone with you," Eleanor curtsied. "Your Grace, I did not see you arrive." "I came separately from the Duke tonight," the Countess smiled thinly. "He seems rather distracted of late, since Lady Rothel's ball, in fact." Eleanor maintained her composure. "I cannot imagine why that would concern me." "Can you not?" The Countess stepped closer. "Let me be direct, my dear. Alaric and I have an understanding. He may be experiencing some nostalgia regarding your previous acquaintance, but I assure you it is nothing more. If you have an understanding with the Duke, then it is to him you should speak," Eleanor replied evenly. "Excuse me?" As she attempted to move past, the Countess caught her arm. "He will be mine," she hissed, her composure slipping momentarily. "Do not delude yourself into thinking otherwise." Before Eleanor could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Is everything all right, ladies?" Alaric stood beside them, his expression guarded, but his eyes fixed on where the Countess's fingers dug into Eleanor's arm. The Countess immediately released her grip, her demeanor transforming. "Alaric, darling, Lady Eleanor and I were just becoming better acquainted." "Were you indeed?" His tone suggested he believed otherwise. "Lady Eleanor, I believe your sister is looking for you." Grateful for the excuse, Eleanor nodded stiffly. "Your Grace, Countess." She departed swiftly, her heart pounding. She had nearly reached Clara when Alaric appeared at her side. "A moment, please," he said quietly. "In the library. It's important." Eleanor hesitated, then glanced toward the Countess, who was watching them with barely concealed fury. "Very well. 2 minutes." The Ashworth's library was blessedly empty. Alaric closed the door partially, enough for propriety, but affording them some privacy. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately. "Isolde can be forceful when she feels challenged." "I am perfectly capable of handling the Countess," Eleanor replied, "though I fail to understand why she considers me a challenge given your apparent understanding." "There's no understanding, Lady Eleanor." Alaric's voice was firm, resolute, cutting through the lingering tension of Isolde's implication. "Countess Blackwood has chosen to interpret certain courtesies as more meaningful than they are." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eleanor merely offered a dismissive gesture. "Your personal arrangements are none of my concern, Your Grace," she replied, her voice cool and steady. "Why, then, have you brought me here?" Alaric ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so familiar it made Eleanor's heart constrict, despite her resolve. "I visited your father yesterday." Eleanor blinked, surprised by his frankness. "Yes, he informed me," she replied, a hint of accusation in her tone. "Most presumptuous of you, Your Grace." Alaric's gaze met hers, strained but determined. "I know, I have no right to ask for a second chance, Lady Eleanor," he said quietly. "But I must explain what happened last year." "Must you?" Eleanor folded her arms protectively across her chest. "I believe your actions made your feelings perfectly clear." Alaric's composure, usually so impenetrable, cracked with sudden vehemence. "No," he insisted, taking a step closer. "They did not. When I left, it was not because I didn't care for you. It was because I cared too much." Eleanor laughed, a bitter, incredulous sound that echoed faintly in the hushed library. "What a novel excuse, Your Grace. You abandoned me because you cared too deeply. How convenient." She shook her head in disbelief. What news could possibly justify such cruelty? Alaric hesitated, his dark eyes shadowed with an inner turmoil. "I can't tell you. Not yet." He took a deep, ragged breath. "But I swear to you, Eleanor, I left to protect you, not to hurt you." Eleanor's gaze was unwavering, devoid of warmth. "Protect me from what? Your affection?" She shook her head slowly, a profound weariness settling over her. "You are either lying now, or you were lying then. Either way, I see no reason to trust you." Alaric's expression tightened, accepting her skepticism. "I understand your disbelief," he said quietly. But I am asking, begging for the chance to prove myself to you again." Before Eleanor could respond, the library door opened fully, revealing Mr. Julian Croft. His gaze moved between Eleanor and Alaric, a flicker of concern in his kind eyes. "Ah, there you are, Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice polite, but with an underlying current of relief. "Your sister was concerned about your absence." Eleanor seized the opportunity for escape. "Mr. Croft, how thoughtful! I was just returning to the gathering." As she moved toward Julian, Alaric spoke once more, his voice a low plea. "Eleanor, please. One chance to explain fully." She paused, turning back to him, her expression unreadable. "I have a prior engagement tomorrow, Your Grace, but I will be walking in Hyde Park the day after at 11. If you wish to speak further, you may find me there." With that, she left with Julian, leaving Alaric alone in the library, hope and determination warring in his expression. Eleanor had spent a restless night, tossing and turning as she debated the wisdom of meeting Alaric. Curiosity, yes, but also a treacherous sliver of hope had won out over her caution. "Are you certain you don't want me to accompany you?" Clara asked the following morning, her brow furrowed with concern as Eleanor donned her bonnet and gloves. "Quite certain," Eleanor replied, her voice strained. "Whatever the Duke has to say, I prefer to hear it privately." Clara frowned, adjusting the ribbons of Eleanor's bonnet. "Father would not approve of you meeting him unchaperoned." "We will be in a public park in broad daylight, Clara," Eleanor reminded her gently. "Besides, you know as well as I that Alaric would never compromise my reputation." Clara's skepticism was evident. "The same Alaric who abandoned you without explanation?" Eleanor sighed, looking away. "I simply want answers, Clara. Nothing more." But as she entered the park and saw Alaric waiting by the ornamental lake, Eleanor was forced to acknowledge that her feelings were far more complicated than a simple desire for closure. He stood tall and straight, without the usual trappings of his status. No valet, no fine carriage waiting nearby. His greatcoat was of excellent quality but understated, and he held his hat in his hands rather than wearing it, revealing hair slightly ruffled by the breeze. When he spotted her, his expression transformed from anxiety to relief. "You came," he said simply, his voice a low murmur. "I said I would," Eleanor replied, her tone carefully neutral. "I keep my promises." They strolled in silence for several minutes, following the gravel path around the lake. The air was crisp, the morning sun glinting off the water. Finally, Alaric spoke. "Do you remember when we first met at Lady Winchester's dinner party?" Eleanor nodded stiffly. "You were seated beside me and spoke hardly a word all evening. I thought you insufferably proud." A small smile touched his lips, a fleeting ghost of happier days. "I was terrified. You were so beautiful, so self-possessed. I couldn't think of a single intelligent thing to say." "You found your voice eventually," Eleanor observed, a flicker of the past in her eyes. "Particularly during those walks we took. The happiest hours of my life," Alaric said quietly, his gaze fixed on the shimmering water. Eleanor stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Why did you leave, Alaric? The truth, this time." He gazed out over the water, gathering his thoughts, his usual composure struggling against a tide of emotion. "It began with a letter from my former ward, Leo Harding." Eleanor frowned, surprised. "I didn't know you had a ward." "The son of my late cousin," Alaric explained, his voice low. "I became his guardian when he was 12, after his parents died in a carriage accident." "Where is he now?" "Cambridge. He's 20 now, nearly finished with his studies." Alaric's expression darkened, growing grim. Leo's letter contained disturbing news about a man named Silas Blackwood, a businessman with whom my father had significant dealings before his death. Eleanor's frown deepened. "I don't understand what this has to do with us." "Everything," Alaric said grimly, his gaze locking onto hers. "Leo discovered evidence suggesting that Blackwood had been systematically defrauding my father for years. But worse, far worse, was the suggestion that Blackwood might have been involved in my father's death." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The sheer horror of it was staggering. "Your father's riding accident? But that was 10 years ago. Yes. Alaric's voice was tight with controlled emotion. The official finding was misadventure. His horse spooked and threw him, but Leo uncovered correspondence, indicating my father had confronted Blackwood about financial discrepancies just days before his death. Alaric, that's horrifying, Eleanor said, genuine concern overriding her carefully constructed reserve. But why didn't you tell me? He turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. Because of who Silas Blackwood is. He's Countess Isolde Blackwood's uncle and her financial advisor. Eleanor's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place with a sickening clarity. The Countess Isolde. So your sudden interest in Isolde was never... Interest? Alaric finished, a harsh note in his voice. No, it was investigation. I needed to get close enough to discover if she was involved in her uncle's schemes. And is she? Eleanor asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alaric hesitated. I don't believe so. Isolde is ambitious and calculating, but I found no evidence linking her directly to Blackwood's crimes. Eleanor processed this information slowly. But why cut me off completely? Why not simply tell me the truth? Because Blackwood is dangerous, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a low, grave tone. When I began looking into his affairs, there was an incident, a warning. He paused, reliving the memory. My carriage was deliberately run off the road on my return from Silver Court. The driver was injured, though I escaped unharmed. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth once more, a soft cry escaping her lips. Heavens, you might have been killed. Indeed. Alaric's expression was grim, and the message was clear. Blackwood knew I was investigating him, and he would stop at nothing to prevent it. So you pushed me away to protect me, Eleanor murmured, understanding dawning, though it did little to soothe the ache in her heart. I couldn't bear the thought of you being harmed because of me, Alaric said fervently, stepping closer. If Blackwood had discovered my feelings for you, you would have become a target. I thought it would be better for you to hate me than to be in danger. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words. The truth, finally. A misguided, painful truth. And now? Why tell me all this now? Eleanor finally asked, her voice still quiet. Because it's over, Eleanor said with quiet triumph, a weight seeming to lift from his shoulders. 3 weeks ago, Blackwood was arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Leo and I provided the authorities with evidence of his crimes. He's currently awaiting trial with no possibility of release. Eleanor let out a slow breath of relief. That's wonderful news, Alaric. And the suspicions about your father's death? Alaric's expression darkened slightly. Still unproven, unfortunately. But Blackwood will spend the rest of his life in prison for his financial crimes at least. Eleanor digested this information slowly. So, your courting of the Countess? A necessary deception? To gain access to her household and potentially her uncle's papers, Alaric confirmed, his mouth twisting wryly. Not my proudest moment, but effective. They resumed walking, their pace slower, more thoughtful. Does she know that I used our connection to investigate her uncle? Eleanor asked. Not explicitly, though I suspect she has realized by now. Isolde is many things, but not a fool. I understand your reasoning, Alaric, Eleanor said finally, her voice tinged with the lingering hurt. But I cannot forget the pain of your abandonment. For a year I believed I meant nothing to you. You meant everything, Alaric said with sudden passion, stopping again and turning to her. You still do. Every day away from you was torture, but I would endure it again if it meant keeping you safe. Eleanor's pensive expression showed the conflict within her. His words were a balm, but the wound remained. Eleanor stopped once more, turning to face him fully. I admire your protection of Leo and your pursuit of justice for your father. But Alaric, don't you see, your fundamental mistake was not trusting me with the truth. You made decisions about my life, about us, without giving me any choice in the matter. Alaric's shoulders slumped slightly as the truth of her words hit home. You're right, he admitted, his voice rough with remorse. I was so focused on protecting you physically that I never considered the emotional harm I was causing. It was unconscionable. Yes, Eleanor agreed, her gaze steady. It was. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor gazed up at him, seeing the anguish in his eyes, the genuine remorse in his expression. "Forgiveness may be possible," she said carefully. "Trust is harder to rebuild." A ray of hope appeared in Alaric's dark eyes. "Then you'll allow me to try." "I make no promises," Eleanor warned, her tone firm. "And if you ever deceive me again for any reason, even with the noblest intentions, we will be finished permanently." "I understand," Alaric said solemnly, his resolve evident. Complete honesty, always. As they continued their walk, a comfortable silence fell between them. Not the easy intimacy they had once shared, but no longer the tense hostility of recent days either. When they parted at the park gates, Alaric asked, "Will you be attending Lady Sinclair's dinner tomorrow evening?" "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Clara is particularly looking forward to it." "Then perhaps might I call on you beforehand?" he requested quietly. "There is something I would like to show you. Documents that corroborate my story." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. 3:00. As Eleanor returned home, her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Alaric's explanation made sense of his inexplicable behavior, but the wound of his abandonment had cut deep. Could she truly trust him again? Her contemplation was interrupted by the discovery that Mr. Julian Croft awaited her in the drawing room. "Mr. Croft." She greeted him with genuine warmth, tinged with an unavoidable unease. "This is unexpected." Julian rose, bowing slightly. "Forgive the intrusion, Lady Eleanor. I was passing and thought I might inquire if you would honor me with your company at the Sinclair dinner tomorrow." Eleanor's conscience pricked her. Julian had been nothing but kind and attentive during her recovery from heartbreak. He deserved honesty. "Mr. Croft, Julian," she began gently, "I must be forthright with you. The Duke of Beaumont has explained certain circumstances that complicate matters." Julian's expression fell slightly, though he maintained his composure with admirable dignity. "I see. May I ask if these explanations have altered your feelings toward him?" "I'm not entirely certain," Eleanor admitted, gazing at him with genuine regret. "The situation is complex." Julian nodded slowly. "I appreciate your candor, Lady Eleanor. Know that my regard for you remains unchanged. Should you decide that the Duke's explanations are insufficient, I hope you will remember that not all men are so inconstant in their affections." His quiet dignity moved Eleanor deeply. "I would never wish to mislead you, Julian," she said, touched by his maturity. "You are a good man, Mr. Croft. Any woman would be fortunate to receive your attentions. Then we shall continue as friends," Julian said, "and perhaps with time." He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. After Julian departed, leaving her with a complex mixture of gratitude and melancholy, Eleanor found her father in his study, intent upon some estate correspondence. "Papa," she said, using the childhood address that had largely given way to the more formal "father" as she matured. "Might I speak with you?" Lord Vance set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. "Of course, my dear. You seem troubled." Eleanor took a deep breath and recounted Alaric's explanation, watching her father's expression shift from initial skepticism to concern, and finally to grudging understanding. When she finished, Lord Vance was silent for a long moment. "It is a remarkable tale," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "And yet I find I'm inclined to believe it. Beaumont has always been a man of honor, his recent behavior notwithstanding." "He claims to have evidence," Eleanor added. "He's bringing it tomorrow when he calls." Lord Vance raised an eyebrow. "You've agreed to receive him, then?" "To see his proof," Eleanor clarified. "Nothing more." Her father studied her carefully, his gaze gentle. "And if his proof is convincing, what then, Eleanor?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice soft. "My heart is confused. And Mr. Croft called earlier." Eleanor sighed. "He is everything kind and good, but he is not the man you love," Lord Vance finished gently, his perception startling Eleanor. She looked up, startled, as her father offered a sad, knowing smile. "You didn't say that. You didn't need to, my dear." The following morning, as Eleanor attended to her correspondence, Clara, ever observant, found herself in a quiet corner of the townhouse, ostensibly tidying some forgotten trinkets, but in truth seeking out Mrs. Davies, a former housemaid who had once worked for the Beaumont family. "Mrs. Davies," Clara began, her tone casual, "I was merely admiring your stitchwork. Tell me, you knew the late Duke Beaumont, did you not?" Mrs. Davies, a kindly woman with a memory like a steel trap, beamed. "Oh, yes, Lady Clara. A fine gentleman he was. Terribly sad about his accident." Clara nodded sympathetically. "Indeed. And his relations? Were they always close?" Mrs. Davies paused, her brow furrowing slightly as she considered. "Well, there was a distant cousin, Mr. Silas Blackwood, seemed to take a sudden, strong interest in the family finances shortly after the Duke passed. Quite out of place, it seemed to me, a man like him always at the solicitor's office." Clara's thoughtful expression betrayed her, but Mrs. Davies, lost in memory, didn't notice. The detail, small as it was, settled in Clara's mind, a prickle of unease accompanying it. The following afternoon, Alaric arrived at the Vance townhouse precisely at 3 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio. Eleanor received him in the drawing-room, with Clara present as propriety demanded. "Your Grace," Eleanor greeted him formally, her composure impeccable. "Lady Eleanor, Lady Clara." Alaric bowed, his gaze lingering on Eleanor a moment longer than strictly necessary. Then he gestured to the portfolio. "I've brought the documents I mentioned." Clara, sensing the gravity of the moment, rose with a knowing smile. "I believe I hear Mrs. Collins calling me, if you'll excuse me." Once Clara had departed, though Eleanor suspected she lingered just outside the door, Alaric opened the portfolio and spread several papers on the table between them. His movements precise, almost clinical. "These are copies of correspondence between my father and Blackwood," he explained, indicating a stack of yellowing letters. "Note the dates. This final letter was written 3 days before my father's death." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the firm, decisive handwriting, so like Alaric's own. The content, however, was disturbing. Clear accusations of financial impropriety and a demand for a meeting. "This certainly suggests a motive," she acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. "But is it enough to prove murder?" "Unfortunately not," Alaric admitted, his expression grim. "But these," he produced newer documents, "are bank records showing how Blackwood systematically embezzled funds from my family's investments over a period of years." He then unfolded a crisp newspaper clipping. "And this is the announcement of his arrest 3 weeks ago." Eleanor read the clipping, which detailed charges of fraud against prominent businessman Silas Blackwood, without mentioning any connection to the Duke of Beaumont. "You kept your name out of the papers," she observed, a note of understanding in her voice. "For as long as possible," Alaric agreed, a cold satisfaction in his tone. "Though I imagine the connection will emerge during the trial." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "And the Countess? How has she responded to her uncle's arrest?" Alaric's expression hardened slightly. "She claims ignorance of his financial dealings, though she must have benefited from them. Her late husband's fortune was largely managed by Blackwood. Elizabeth is many things, but she is practiced at protecting herself. Whether through genuine ignorance or willful blindness, I cannot say for certain." Eleanor recalled Isolde's possessive hand on Alaric's arm at the musical. "She seemed quite possessive of you at the musical," Eleanor observed. A shadow crossed Alaric's face. "I allowed her to believe our connection was deeper than it was, a necessary deception to gain access to Blackwood. It was not honorable, but I felt justified in my pursuit of justice. Any pretense of courtship is over." Eleanor considered this, her mind working rapidly through all the presented evidence. Everything Alaric had shown her aligned with his explanation. She carefully returned the documents to the portfolio, acknowledging their support for his story. Yet one crucial question remained. "Why did you not contact me once Blackwood was safely in custody?" Eleanor asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Why wait until we encountered each other at Lady Rothel's ball?" Alaric's expression turned raw, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Fear, plain and simple. I had convinced myself that you must hate me, rightfully so, and that any attempt to renew our connection would be unwelcome. When I saw you at the ball, so beautiful and apparently recovered from whatever pain I had caused, I nearly lost my nerve entirely. But you followed me to the terrace, Eleanor reminded him, her heart quickening at the raw emotion in his eyes. I couldn't help myself, Alaric admitted, his voice rough. Seeing you again, it was like coming home after a long, dark journey. Eleanor maintained her composure, though his words touched something deep within her. These documents support your explanation, she said carefully. But trust once broken is not easily mended. I understand, Alaric said solemnly. I ask only for the opportunity to earn your trust again, not through words but through actions. The dim London alleyway was a maze of shadows, clinging to the grimy brickwork like damp cloth. Thomas, Lady Eleanor's most trusted footman, hurried along, a small, discreet package tucked carefully inside his waistcoat pocket. It was a note to the milliner, a simple errand, but he felt a prickle of unease. The city had been restless lately. Suddenly, two rough men emerged from the deeper shadows, blocking his path. Their faces were obscured by the twilight, but their intent was clear. Hold there, lad, one growled, his voice raspy. Are you carrying anything for Lady Vance from the Duke Beaumont? Thomas's heart hammered. They knew. No, sir, he lied, trying to push past, but a heavy hand gripped his shoulder. He struggled, but the men were stronger, roughing him up, demanding he hand over what he carried. Thomas fought with surprising ferocity, protecting the untouched package for the milliner, until a sudden blow to the head sent him sprawling. The men, seemingly frustrated by his empty pockets, cursed and vanished back into the gloom, leaving him gasping on the cobbles. Thomas, his livery disheveled and a blooming bruise on his temple, stood before Eleanor and Lord Vance in the drawing-room, recounting the terrifying encounter. They asked specifically for a package, my lady, he explained, still slightly breathless. From the Duke Beaumont to you. They seemed informed. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth, her face paling. The men had been waiting, knew to ask for a specific package. This was no random robbery. Lord Vance's expression hardened, his distinguished features etched with grim understanding. This is a direct consequence of Blackwood, Eleanor, he said, his voice grave. Alaric's warnings were not exaggerations. Eleanor felt a cold knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The vague threats of the past had become a tangible, present danger. Her father immediately dispatched a footman to Alaric's townhouse with an urgent message. Bartholomew, Alaric's impeccably dressed valet, entered the Duke's London library with a hushed urgency, carrying an unsealed note. Your Grace, an urgent message from Lord Vance. Alaric, who had been reviewing legal documents, took the note, his brow furrowing as he read. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his eyes growing grim. A direct attack. They know. The immediate threat to Eleanor was undeniable. Without a word, he crumpled the note in his hand. My carriage, Bartholomew, he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Immediately, to the Vance townhouse. His decision was made, his protective instincts overriding all other concerns. Alaric arrived at the Vance townhouse minutes later, his greatcoat still damp from the hurried ride, his concern evident in his taut posture. My lord, Lady Eleanor, he said, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, whose pale face betrayed her recent fright. I received your message. Thomas has my admiration for his courage. He turned to Lord Vance. Silas Blackwood's associates are emboldened by his arrest, not deterred. They see Lady Eleanor as a means to pressure me, to disrupt the trial. The danger is no longer merely a possibility. It is present and immediate. Eleanor shivered, the reality of the threat chilling her to the bone. I propose you and your family relocate to Silver Court at once, Alaric continued, his voice firm with resolve. There, I can ensure your safety more effectively than in London. "It is not merely for protection, though that is paramount," Alaric clarified, his gaze softening as he looked at Eleanor. "It is also, as I offered before, an opportunity for you to see me as I truly am, unburdened by the immediate demands of the investigation or the dictates of London society." Eleanor considered his proposal. The attack on Thomas had made the danger undeniably real, and Alaric's protective resolve was equally undeniable. To accept his invitation to Silver Court would serve a dual purpose: sanctuary from a tangible threat, and a crucial chance to observe the man who claimed to love her, away from the artifice of London. Lord Vance, his expression grave, finally nodded. "I will consider it, Alaric, with certain stipulations for propriety, of course. My daughters' reputations must remain unblemished." In the quiet solitude of her bedchamber, Lady Clara Vance meticulously reviewed her notes. Scrawled across a page was the anecdote from Mrs. Davies, the former housemaid. Mr. Silas Blackwood took a sudden, strong interest in the Beaumont family finances shortly after the late Duke's death. It seemed out of place. Clara's brow furrowed in concentration as she cross-referenced this with the newspaper clippings of Silas Blackwood's recent arrest for embezzlement. The time frame of the alleged fraud now aligned eerily with the timing of the late Duke's passing. Silas's machinations ran deeper and had begun far earlier than Alaric had initially stated. This detail, while strengthening Alaric's narrative about Blackwood's long-standing villainy, also highlighted how profoundly Alaric had been burdened by this secret, and for how long. The revelation sent a prickle of apprehension down Clara's spine. The Duke had clearly been caught in a web of danger for years. Julian Croft paced his study, the old Financial Gazette clipping clutched in his hand. The suppressed scandal, the removed name, it gnawed at him. Alaric had spoken of his investigation, of protecting Eleanor, but this detail, this decade-old cover-up, suggested a deeper, more entrenched secrecy. Was Alaric truly being honest, or was there more he was keeping hidden, even now? Julian felt a profound sense of responsibility towards Eleanor. He knew she was giving Alaric a chance, but this information, it was unsettling. Could revealing it cause her more pain? Or was it his duty to ensure she entered this new phase with her eyes wide open? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He had to tell her, but cautiously, before she left for Silver Court, a place where Alaric's influence would be absolute. The morning before their departure, Clara helped Eleanor with her packing, the silence punctuated by the rustle of silk and lace. "Eleanor," Clara began, her voice casual, yet with an underlying seriousness. "I had another chat with Mrs. Davies, our old housemaid. She recalled something rather curious about Silas Blackwood, how he suddenly took a keen interest in the Beaumont finances right after the late Duke died. Said it seemed out of place at the time." Eleanor paused, a silk gown half folded in her hands. "Coincidental timing, indeed," she murmured, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "It certainly strengthens Alaric's narrative about Blackwood's long-standing machinations." Clara nodded, her expression growing more serious. "It does, but it also highlights just how dangerous he must be to have buried such a detail. And it makes me uneasy, sister, knowing you're going to Silver Court when his associates are still a threat." Eleanor felt a renewed apprehension. Clara's independent detail added weight to Alaric's story, but also to the lingering danger. Julian Croft arrived at the Vance townhouse just as Eleanor was making final preparations, requesting to speak with her privately. His usual calm demeanor was replaced by a more serious, almost somber air. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice low, "I confess, I am concerned about your journey to Silver Court." He then revealed his discovery of the old Financial Gazette, detailing the suppressed scandal linking Silas Blackwood to the late Duke Beaumont. The details were removed from public record, Lady Eleanor. Julian emphasized, his gaze earnest. "It implies a deliberate cover-up, a deliberate silencing of truth. While I understand the Duke's reasons for secrecy, this raises questions about how much of the truth he truly allowed to surface, even now. I urge you to be cautious, to observe closely. There may be more to his past than even he has revealed." Eleanor's brow furrowed. The initial shock of Alaric's explanation had given way to belief, but Julian's words planted a new seed of doubt. Was Alaric still withholding something, even with the noblest of intentions? Eleanor immediately sought her father in his study, Julian's words echoing in her mind. She recounted Julian's findings, highlighting the suppressed nature of the old scandal. Lord Vance listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "A troubling detail indeed, my dear," he conceded. "It could well explain Alaric's extreme caution if such information was deliberately buried. But it also raises questions about his full transparency, as Mr. Croft noted." He rose, placing a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "At Silver Court, you are not merely a guest, Eleanor. You are an observer. Seek the full truth, not just what is presented. Your happiness, and indeed your safety, depend on it." His advice, though delivered with paternal love, underscored the continued complexity of her situation. _start. Global scene number 68. The Vances' traveling carriage departed London, its wheels rattling over the cobblestones, bound for Silver Court. Eleanor watched the familiar cityscape recede into the gray morning mist, her thoughts a tumultuous mix. The information from Julian and Clara, the immediate danger to Thomas, Alaric's earnest explanations, it all swirled within her. She acknowledged that while her heart was less guarded than a week prior, new questions had arisen, new layers of complexity to Alaric's past. This journey was not merely a retreat from danger, but a crucial test, a crucible where the true measure of Alaric Beaumont would finally be taken. Silver Court rose majestically against the backdrop of rolling Derbyshire hills, its pale stone glowing warmly in the late afternoon sun. As the Vance's carriage approached the imposing estate, Eleanor felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. This was Alaric's ancestral home, the heart of his responsibilities, and the true measure of the man he had become. "Gracious," Clara breathed, leaning forward to get a better view. "It's magnificent," Lord Vance nodded appreciatively. "One of the finest estates in the county by all accounts." Eleanor gazed at the grand edifice, understanding that here, away from London's artifice, she might finally find the answers she sought. Alaric himself met them in the grand entrance hall, dressed not in the formal attire of London, but in the practical, well-fitted clothing of a country gentleman. His face, though composed, lit up at the sight of Eleanor, though he maintained a proper distance as he welcomed them. "Lord Vance, Lady Eleanor, Lady Clara," he said, his deep voice warm. "Welcome to Silver Court. I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite satisfactory, thank you," Lord Vance replied. "A fine property you have here, Alaric." "Thank you, sir. It's been in my family for 15 generations. Alaric's pride was evident, not in arrogance, but in his clear sense of responsibility. Mrs. Hodges, the dignified housekeeper, stepped forward. "Everything has been prepared according to His Grace's instructions. If you require anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." As Eleanor followed Mrs. Hodges up the grand staircase, her hand gliding over the polished banister, she caught Alaric's eye. The intensity of his gaze, hopeful, anxious, determined, reminded her sharply of why she had accepted this invitation. She was here not just for safety, but to discover the truth of his character beyond words and explanations, beyond the shadows of his past. Her chambers were spacious and elegant, with large windows overlooking the formal gardens, and beyond them the shimmering surface of the lake that gave the estate its name. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and a fire crackled cheerfully in the grate. His Grace selected these rooms himself, my lady. Mrs. Hodges informed her as a maid unpacked Eleanor's trunks. They have the finest view in the house, excepting the Duke's own chambers. It's lovely, Eleanor acknowledged. Has the Duke been in residence long? Just 3 weeks, my lady, since his return from London. But he's accomplished more in that time than in the previous year. Mrs. Hodges's expression softened with evident approval. Up at dawn every day, meeting with the steward, visiting the farms, overseeing the improvements to the cottages. A true master of the estate, just like his father before him. After refreshing herself from the journey, Eleanor joined her father and sister for dinner in the formal dining room. Alaric, as host, led the conversation with easy charm, answering Lord Vance's questions about estate management and discussing with Clara the history of the art collection that graced the walls. Tomorrow, if the weather permits, Alaric said as they enjoyed dessert, I thought we might tour the home farm and see the cottage improvements, unless you would prefer to rest after your journey. Not at all, Lord Vance responded. I'm most interested in your agricultural methods. I understand you've implemented some innovations at Silver. Eleanor observed Alaric carefully throughout the evening. Here, in his ancestral home, he seemed more relaxed, yet also more focused, a man comfortable with his responsibilities, and genuinely invested in the welfare of his estate and its dependents. In a disused warehouse on the grimy outskirts of London, Bain, a hardened associate of Silas Blackwood, slammed his fist on a rickety wooden table. They've gone to Silver Court, he snarled. Maps of the Derbyshire estate spread before him. That damnable Duke has spirited her away, making our task 10 times harder. His henchman, a burly man named Gus, shifted uncomfortably. What now, boss? We ain't got eyes there. Then get some, Bain hissed, his eyes glinting with cold fury. Blackwood wants that trial disrupted, and the Duke's precious Lady Eleanor is our leverage. Keep eyes on them. Find a way. I want a message delivered to Lady Eleanor that will make the Duke rethink his priorities, make him understand the cost of crossing Silas Blackwood. The henchman nodded, a grim understanding passing between them. The peaceful idyll of Silver Court was about to be shattered. The following morning dawned clear and mild. After breakfast, Alaric provided spirited horses for Lord Vance and Eleanor, while Clara chose to remain at the house with Mrs. Hodges, who had offered to show her the famous silver tapestries. As they rode across the estate, Alaric pointed out the boundaries, the tenant farms, and the bustling village that depended on Silver for its prosperity. We are particularly proud of the new school, he told them, indicating a sturdy stone building near the village. Built last year and expanded this spring to accommodate more children. You fund education for the tenants' children? Eleanor asked, genuinely impressed. Of course, Alaric replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. An educated workforce benefits everyone, and every child deserves the opportunity to develop their mind. Lord Vance nodded approvingly. A progressive view, Your Grace. Not all landowners share it. They continued to the row of stone cottages where workmen were busy installing new windows and repairing roofs. These improvements were long overdue, Alaric admitted, as they dismounted to inspect the work more closely. His tone was not one of self-praise, but a quiet, almost rueful acceptance of a responsibility that should have been addressed sooner. I regret that my distractions in London delayed them. An older man, his face weathered by sun and toil, approached, doffing his cap respectfully. Your Grace, my lord, my lady, the new slates for the Jenkins cottage arrived this morning. Excellent, Thornton, Alaric replied, a genuine smile gracing his lips. He turned to Eleanor and her father. Allow me to introduce Mr. Thornton, my steward and right hand in all matters concerning Silver Court. After discussing the ongoing work with Mr. Thornton, they remounted and continued their tour. Eleanor noted how the tenants they encountered greeted Alaric with genuine respect and obvious affection. It was not the fearful deference often shown to landlords, but the warm regard given to a fair and considerate master. "You seem well loved by your people," she observed as they paused by a stream where new irrigation works were underway. Alaric looked surprised at her comment. "I wouldn't presume to say loved. I simply try to fulfill my obligations to those who depend on Silvercourt for their livelihood. My father taught me that true nobility lies not in titles or wealth, but in how one uses position to benefit others." Lord Vance nodded approvingly. "A progressive view, Your Grace, and one not universally embraced among our peers." When they returned to the house for luncheon, Eleanor found herself viewing Alaric in a new light. Here in his ancestral home, surrounded by the tangible evidence of his care and responsibility, the cold, distant figure who had broken her heart seemed to fade. His dedication to his estate and its people revealed a depth of character that aligned with the man she had begun to love a year ago, before his inexplicable disappearance. Over the next several days, Eleanor saw more evidence of Alaric's true nature. He spent long hours with his steward, personally oversaw the care of an elderly tenant who had fallen ill, and patiently explained the estate's accounts to Lord Vance when the older man expressed interest. Each action, small yet significant, chipped away at the wall Eleanor had built around her heart, replacing doubt with a cautious, growing appreciation. On the 5th day of their visit, Eleanor was reading in the library when Alaric found her alone. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, hesitating at the door. "Not at all," she replied, setting aside her book. "I was just admiring your collection. It's quite impressive." "My mother's influence," Alaric explained, moving closer. "She was a great reader and insisted that Silver's library remain current, not merely a repository of ancient volumes no one ever opened." Eleanor smiled at this insight into his family. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Alaric agreed, his expression softening with memory. "I think she would have liked you very much, Eleanor." The casual use of her given name the first time since their reunion created a moment of unexpected intimacy between them. "I wanted to ask," Alaric continued, "if you would care to walk with me this afternoon. There's a particular spot by the lake I thought you might enjoy." Eleanor hesitated, aware that accepting would signal a significant shift in their relationship, a public acknowledgement of their private dance. Yet, after nearly a week at Silvercourt, observing Alaric, witnessing his genuine character, she found her resistance weakening. The Alaric she observed here was indeed the man she had begun to love in London. Thoughtful, intelligent, honorable, not the cold, distant figure who had broken her heart. "I would like that," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. Later, as they strolled along the lake shore, a comfortable silence fell between them. The afternoon sun dappled the water's surface, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. "This was my favorite place as a boy," Alaric said, leading her to a small, sheltered cove where an ancient oak tree spread its massive branches. "I would come here to read, to think, to escape my tutors when their lessons grew too tedious." Eleanor smiled at the image of a young Alaric hiding from his responsibilities. "I had a similar retreat at Willower Park, a window seat in the unused east wing where no one ever thought to look for me." "We were not so different then," Alaric observed. "Perhaps not," Eleanor agreed. They sat on a stone bench beneath the oak facing the lake. For a long moment, neither spoke, content in the peaceful setting in each other's company. Finally, Alaric turned to her. "Eleanor, I must ask, has your time at Silver changed your perspective at all?" The directness of his question caught her off guard, though she had been expecting it. "I've seen much to admire," she acknowledged. "Your dedication to the estate, your concern for your tenants, your sense of responsibility. These speak well of your character." Alaric nodded, encouragement in his expression, his gaze searching hers, urging her to continue. "And as to the other matter," Eleanor sighed softly. "If you're asking whether I believe your explanation about Silas Blackwood and your reasons for leaving, yes, I do believe you were sincere in your desire to protect me." Relief flooded his features, but Eleanor held up a hand to forestall his response. "However," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "I still maintain that you should have trusted me with the truth. We might have found another solution together, one that didn't involve such pain." Alaric's shoulders slumped slightly as the truth of her words hit home. "You're right," he said immediately, his voice thick with humility. "It was arrogance on my part, believing I alone could make such decisions. If I could change one thing about my actions, it would be that." His humility touched her. The Alaric she had known in London had been proud, sometimes to a fault. This willingness to acknowledge his mistake revealed growth. "What would you have us be to each other now, Alaric?" Eleanor asked softly, her gaze searching his. Alaric took her hand gently, his touch sending a warmth through her, giving her every opportunity to withdraw it if she wished. When she didn't, he spoke with quiet intensity. "Everything we might have been before I made my grievous error. Friends, companions, confidants, and eventually, if you can find it in your heart to fully trust me again, husband and wife." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Alaric, I am not proposing this moment," he clarified quickly, a tender smile touching his lips. "That would be presumptuous. I am merely telling you what I hope for, what I will work toward earning if you'll allow me the chance." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, then back to his earnest face. The joy that transformed Alaric's expression was almost painful to witness. It reminded her so vividly of their early days together, before doubt and pain had complicated their connection. "I think I would like to allow you that chance," she said finally, a fragile hope blossoming in her chest. "That is all I ask," he said fervently. "Time to prove myself worthy of your trust again." As they walked back to the house, a comfortable silence fell between them. Not the easy intimacy they had once shared, but no longer the tense hostility of recent days either. Over the next several days, a deeper sense of comfort began to settle between them. They rode together in the mornings, Alaric showing Eleanor his favorite places on the estate, recounting tales of his youth. In the evenings, he played chess with Lord Vance, while Eleanor and Clara provided music on the pianoforte and harp, filling the drawing room with harmonious melodies. It was during one such evening, as Eleanor played a particularly moving Beethoven sonata, that she glanced up to find Alaric watching her with such unguarded tenderness that her fingers faltered momentarily on the keys. The intensity of his gaze, the openness of his admiration, these were the qualities that had drawn her to him initially, now restored after the coldness that had preceded their separation. On the 9th day of their visit, a messenger arrived from London, bearing letters for both Alaric and Lord Vance. As the gentlemen retired to the library to review their correspondence, Clara seized the opportunity to speak privately with her sister. "Well," she demanded, once they were alone in the morning room, "are you and the Duke reconciled? The way he looks at you suggests he believes so." Eleanor smiled at her sister's directness. "We are finding our way back to an understanding." "So, you've forgiven him?" Clara persisted. "I believe his explanation," Eleanor clarified, "and I acknowledge the honorable intentions behind his misguided actions. As for complete forgiveness, I'm not certain such things can be rushed. But you love him still," Clara stated with the confidence of one who knew her sister well. Eleanor sighed softly. "I never stopped loving him, Clara." That was the true difficulty. Their conversation was interrupted by the return of Alaric and Lord Vance, both wearing grave expressions. "Is something amiss?" Eleanor asked, immediately concerned. Lord Vance handed her a letter. "From your cousin, Seraphina Croft. It seems London society has noticed our absence and drawn its own conclusions." Eleanor scanned the letter quickly, her cheeks flushing at Seraphina's blunt recounting of the latest gossip, that the Duke of Beaumont had lured Lady Eleanor Vance to his country estate to make amends for his previous abandonment, that an engagement announcement was imminent, and that the Countess of Blackwood was beside herself with fury at being so thoroughly displaced. "This is mortifying," Eleanor murmured, returning the letter to her father. "Society will always find something to discuss," Lord Vance said dismissively. "I am more concerned about this." He nodded to Alaric, who held his own letter with a troubled expression. "I've received word from my solicitor," Alaric explained. Silas Blackwood has begun his trial, and there are complications." "What sort of complications?" Eleanor asked anxiously. "He's making accusations." Alaric's jaw tightened, "claiming that I fabricated evidence against him as revenge for a business disagreement with my father. More concerning is that he somehow managed to communicate with the Countess despite his imprisonment." "Isolde is involved?" Eleanor felt a chill of apprehension. "My solicitor believes she may be preparing to testify on her uncle's behalf," Alaric confirmed grimly, "which would require my presence in London to counter her claims." The implications hung heavily in the air. Their peaceful interlude at Silver Court would need to end. "When must you leave?" Eleanor asked. "Tomorrow, if I'm to reach London in time for the next session of the trial," Alaric replied. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the Vance family. "I had hoped, that is, I would be honored if you would all return with me." Lord Vance considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. "I believe that would be wise. If society is already speculating about our presence here, a return together would present a united front." Thus, it was decided. Trunks were packed, arrangements made, and the following morning saw their carriages departing Silver Court for the journey back to London. As they traveled, Eleanor reflected on how differently she felt now compared to when they had first arrived at the estate. Then she had been uncertain, weary, her heart still heavily guarded by the lingering questions Julian's warning had raised. Now, while caution remained, and Julian's unsettling discovery still pricked at her mind, hope had blossomed alongside it. She acknowledged that the deep, protective man she had witnessed at Silver Court was far more real than the cold figure of her memory. Upon their return to London, they discovered that Seraphina's letter had not exaggerated the extent of society's interest. Sojourn callers descended upon the Vance townhouse almost immediately, ostensibly to welcome them back, but clearly seeking confirmation of the rumors. "Is it true that the Duke proposed at Silver Court, Lady Eleanor?" Lady Worthington asked directly during one such call, her expression avid with curiosity. "The Duke has been a perfect gentleman and gracious host," Eleanor replied evenly, a practiced smile on her lips. "Beyond that, I have no comment on private matters." Her diplomatic response did little to discourage speculation. Invitations poured in, many specifically mentioning that the Duke of Beaumont would also be present, as if the hostesses were providing opportunities for a public announcement. More troubling was the news that Countess Isolde Blackwood had indeed returned to London and was making her presence felt in society circles. "She's telling anyone who will listen that you took advantage of her absence to entrench yourself with the Duke," Clara reported after returning from a morning call, a mischievous glint in her eye. "According to her, your entire visit to Silver Court was a calculated strategy to secure a proposal." Eleanor's indignation flared. "That's absurd. We went at Alaric's invitation with Father as chaperone. There was nothing improper about it. Society rarely concerns itself with truth when gossip is more entertaining," Clara noted wryly. "And Isolde has a flair for drama." Meanwhile, Alaric was occupied with the Silas Blackwood trial, spending long hours with his solicitors and in court. He called at the Vance townhouse when he could, keeping them informed of developments. Isolde testified today. He reported grimly during one such visit, his face etched with weariness. She portrayed her uncle as a misunderstood businessman who fell victim to my obsessive vendetta over imagined slights to my father's memory. "And was she believed?" Lord Vance asked. "By some, perhaps," Alaric replied, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "She can be quite compelling when she wishes, but my solicitor presented bank records that speak for themselves. The financial fraud, at least, is irrefutable." Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, asked, "And what of the suspicions regarding your father's death? Will those be addressed?" A shadow crossed Alaric's face. "The evidence there is circumstantial at best. My focus now is ensuring Silas Blackwood is imprisoned for his financial crimes, which are provable beyond doubt." As the trial progressed, society's attention remained fixed on the curious triangle formed by Alaric, Eleanor, and Isolde. Rumors and counter-rumors flourished. That the Duke would announce his engagement to Eleanor at the Winchesters' ball, that he had secretly reconciled with the Countess, that he had called out a gentleman who had spoken disrespectfully of Lady Eleanor. Through it all, Eleanor maintained a dignified silence, neither confirming nor denying the speculation. She and Alaric had reached a private understanding during their time at Silver Court, but nothing had been formalized between them. They were, as Eleanor had told Clara, finding their way back to each other, a process that required time and could not be rushed for society's entertainment. The following evening, Eleanor and Clara were returning from a modest evening stroll, unaccompanied by a footman due to a misunderstanding in the household schedule. The gas lamps cast long, dancing shadows along the quiet street near the Vance townhouse. Suddenly, a hulking figure emerged from a darkened alleyway, blocking their path. Eleanor gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. "Good evening, ladies," the man rasped, his voice rough. "A message for Lady Vance. Stay out of Blackwood's business, or you'll find out what happens to those who meddle." He lunged, his hand reaching for Eleanor's arm. Clara, though visibly frightened, cried out, "Unhand her!" and tried to push herself between them. But the man was too large, too determined. Eleanor was genuinely terrified, frozen by the sudden, visceral threat. Just as the ruffian's fingers closed around Eleanor's arm, a blur of dark evening attire appeared from behind them. Alaric Beaumont, who had been passing by on his way from his solicitors, had seen the unfolding scene. His intervention was swift and decisive. With a sharp, guttural cry of fury, he seized the ruffian by the collar, tearing him away from Eleanor. Alaric's movements were those of a trained fighter, honed by necessity. A quick, brutal blow sent the man sprawling, then a warning. "Should you ever touch Lady Eleanor again, you will regret the day you were born." The ruffian scrambled to his feet, fear now replacing menace in his eyes, and fled into the darkness. Eleanor, trembling, clutched Clara's hand, gasping for breath. Alaric's anger, usually so controlled, was palpable, his chest heaving with fierce, protective instinct. Back in the safety of the townhouse drawing room, Alaric, still visibly shaken with anger, paced before Eleanor and Lord Vance. Clara, pale but composed, sat beside Eleanor, a comforting hand on her arm. "This is no longer a matter of distant threats, Lord Vance," Alaric stated, his voice tight. "Silas Blackwood's associates are actively targeting Eleanor, that ruffian spoke of, Blackwood's business. This is a direct consequence of my investigation and our association." Eleanor felt a cold dread settle over her. The terrifying extent of the danger he had spoken of, the very reason he had pushed her away a year ago, was now shockingly, undeniably real. "My decision to protect you, however misguided in its method, was born of this very fear," Alaric continued, his gaze meeting Eleanor's. "I could not bear the thought of you being caught in this darkness." Lord Vance, now fully convinced of the present danger, nodded grimly. "We must increase security immediately." "Alaric, I agree to all of your recommendations." Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of her bedchamber, Eleanor sat by the window, trembling slightly as she replayed the attack and Alaric's swift, furious rescue. The image of the ruffian, the whispered threats, her own paralyzing fear, it all brought into sharp, terrifying focus the true, terrifying extent of the danger Alaric had spoken of. He hadn't just feared for her reputation, but for her very life. How deeply he must have loved her, how profoundly he must have feared for her safety, to push her away with such calculated cruelty. The pain of his abandonment, which had festered for so long, now lessened, replaced by a profound understanding and an overwhelming, complicated gratitude for his protective instincts. A dawning love, tempered by the fire of shared danger, began to bloom in her heart. Through it all, society's attention remained fixed on the curious triangle formed by Alaric, Eleanor, and Isolde. Rumors and counter-rumors flourished that the Duke would announce his engagement to Eleanor at the Winchester's ball, that he had secretly reconciled with the Countess, that he had called out a gentleman who had spoken disrespectfully of Lady Eleanor. Speculation ranged from imminent engagements to secret reconciliations and even duels over Eleanor's honor. Eleanor maintained a dignified silence, aware nothing was formalized between her and Alaric. They were, as Eleanor had told Clara, finding their way back to each other, a process that required time and could not be rushed for society's entertainment. This social obsession, however, was about to reach its crescendo. The situation came to a head at the Countess of Harrow's midsummer ball. Eleanor, wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring perfectly, entered the ballroom on her father's arm, with Clara beside them. They had barely completed their greetings to their hostess when a murmur spread through the gathering. The Countess of Blackwood had arrived, resplendent in crimson silk and diamonds, the same shade she had worn when Eleanor had last seen her with Alaric at Lady Rothel's ball, where this complicated chapter had begun. "Courage, my dear," Lord Vance murmured to Eleanor as Isolde made her way toward them with determined grace. "Lady Eleanor." The Countess greeted her, her smile brittle, not reaching her sharp eyes. "How delightful to see you again. I trust your country holiday was restorative." "Quite refreshing." "Thank you," Eleanor replied evenly, meeting Isolde's gaze. "Silver Court is a magnificent estate." "Yes, I recall it well from my previous visits," Isolde said, the implication clear in her tone. "Alaric was most attentive in showing me its particular charms." Eleanor refused to rise to the bait. "His Grace is justifiably proud of his ancestral home." "Indeed," Isolde's smile sharpened, a hint of venom entering her voice. "Speaking of His Grace, I believe he will be arriving shortly. We have much to discuss regarding recent events." The Countess of Harrow's midsummer ball glittered with an almost defiant brilliance, as if to outshine the very air of expectation that hummed beneath the music. Lady Eleanor Vance, radiant in a gown of deep emerald silk that perfectly complemented her dark hair, entered the ballroom on her father's arm. Her sister Clara walked beside them, her gaze sweeping the room with a sisterly vigilance. They had barely completed their greetings to their hostess when a subtle murmur spread through the gathering. The Duchess of Harrington, Countess Isolde Blackwood, had arrived, resplendent in crimson, the same defiant shade she had worn when Eleanor had last seen her with Alaric at Lady Rothel's ball. The very evening this complicated chapter had begun. A footman, with impeccable timing, announced new arrivals, and Duke Alaric Beaumont entered the ballroom. His tall figure commanded attention without effort, his dark eyes immediately seeking Eleanor's across the crowded room. A faint, undeniable smile touched his lips as he spotted her. Isolde, noting the direction of his attention, stiffened almost imperceptibly, her own smile, though outwardly charming, failing to reach her narrowed eyes. Eleanor felt the familiar prickle of tension, a challenge thrown without a word. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace," Eleanor said, her voice smooth and composed, addressing Isolde with a polite nod, "I promised Lady Winchester I would speak with her this evening." With a subtle dip of her head, Eleanor began to move away, leaving Isolde to stew in the wake of Alaric's unwavering gaze. Eleanor had just reached Lady Winchester, exchanging polite pleasantries, when Duke Alaric Beaumont appeared at her side. His presence brought with it a distinct aura of quiet intensity that seemed to cut through the ballroom's chatter. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted her formally, though his eyes, dark and expressive, conveyed a warmer, more personal message that sent a familiar flutter through her. "You look beautiful tonight." Eleanor met his gaze, acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way, a silent chorus of speculation following their every interaction. "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied, maintaining a composure that belied the quickening of her pulse. "How went the proceedings today?" Alaric's expression grew more serious, the weight of his long pursuit of justice momentarily overshadowing the festive atmosphere. "The evidence was compelling. I believe the jury will deliver a verdict soon, perhaps as early as tomorrow." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "That must be a relief after such a long pursuit of justice," Eleanor offered, her voice soft with empathy. "It will be," Alaric agreed, his tone hinting at a deeper exhaustion, "though not the complete justice I had hoped for regarding my father." He looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening, before turning his gaze back to Eleanor, a silent promise in their depths. Their conversation, steeped in the private complexities of their shared history, was interrupted by the arrival of Mr. Julian Croft. He had been conspicuously absent from society gatherings since Eleanor's return from Derbyshire, a silent acknowledgment of the shifting dynamics. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted her with genuine warmth, his kind eyes holding a familiar, steady affection. "You are a vision this evening." Eleanor offered him a grateful smile. "Mr. Croft, how good to see you. It's been too long." Julian then bowed to Alaric, his demeanor respectful, though Eleanor noted the subtle tension that seemed to emanate from the Duke. "Your Grace," Julian said, his voice even. "I understand congratulations may soon be in order regarding the Blackwood trial." "We remain hopeful," Alaric acknowledged, his gaze studying Julian with a mixture of respect and a faint, almost imperceptible weariness. An awkward silence fell between the three, thick with unspoken history and competing affections, until the orchestra, as if sensing the moment, began a new piece, a graceful waltz. "Lady Eleanor," Alaric said, his voice a quiet invitation as the opening strains of the waltz filled the air. He extended his hand, his eyes holding hers with an intense, unspoken question. Eleanor hesitated for only a fraction of a second. She was acutely aware of the many eyes upon them, including those of the Countess Isolde Blackwood, whose gaze she felt like a physical touch from across the room, and Mr. Julian Croft, whose quiet attentiveness was a steady presence. Placing her gloved hand in Alaric's, a decision that felt both public and intensely private, she replied, "I would be delighted, Your Grace." As they took their positions on the dance floor, Alaric guided her skillfully through the waltz, his hand warm and secure at her waist. Despite the crowded ballroom, Eleanor felt as though they were somehow alone, cocooned in the music and the rhythm of their steps. "You've been avoiding me these past few days," Alaric said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone, a hint of vulnerability beneath his aristocratic reserve. "Not avoiding," Eleanor corrected, her gaze steady. "Merely giving you space to focus on the trial. It seemed more important than other matters." Alaric's grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing is more important to me than setting things right between us, Eleanor." Her heart quickened at his words, the sincerity in his tone undeniable. "And the Countess?" she ventured, her voice low. "She seems quite determined to stake her claim." Alaric's expression hardened slightly, his jaw tightening. "Isolde has no claim," he said firmly, his eyes meeting hers with an unwavering intensity. "I've made that abundantly clear to her, though she chooses not to accept it." As their dance came to an end, Alaric retained Eleanor's hand for a moment longer than strictly necessary, his gaze still fixed on hers, as if preparing to speak further. But his words were cut short by the arrival of the Countess Isolde Blackwood herself, who approached with the air of one reclaiming her territory. Her smile was a painted mask of sweetness. Her eyes, however, held a predatory glint. "Alaric, darling," she purred, placing a possessive hand on his arm, her fingers curling around his bicep. "You promised me this next dance, remember?" Alaric's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing almost imperceptibly beneath his skin. His gaze flickered to Isolde's hand, then back to Eleanor. "I made no such promise, Isolde," he stated, his voice cool and firm, lacking any trace of the warmth he had just shown Eleanor. The Countess's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened with a flash of desperate fury. "Perhaps I misunderstood," she conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Nevertheless, Lady Harrow was just saying how delightful it would be to see us dance together for old times' sake." Eleanor, recognizing the awkward position Alaric was in, and keenly aware of the many eyes upon them, stepped back slightly. "I should return to my father in any case. Thank you for the dance, Your Grace." Alaric looked as though he might protest, his gaze lingering on Eleanor, but propriety and Isolde's insistent grip demanded otherwise. With a slight bow to Eleanor, his expression still resolute, he reluctantly allowed the Countess to lead him back to the dance floor, leaving Eleanor with a sense of both triumph and lingering unease. Eleanor watched them for a moment, the Countess Isolde radiant in her perceived triumph, Alaric stiff with barely concealed irritation as he led her through the steps of the waltz. The woman clearly considered Eleanor a rival and was prepared to fight for what she believed was rightfully hers. Eleanor sought out her father, Lord Vance, who stood with Lord Winchester near the edge of the ballroom. "Catherine, my dear," the Earl said as she approached, his gaze shifting briefly to where Alaric danced with the Countess. "I was just discussing with Lord Winchester the possibility of extending our stay in London through August. What do you think?" The question caught her by surprise. "I thought we planned to return to Willowy Park after the season's end." "Plans can change," Lord Vance replied meaningfully, his eyes twinkling with a knowing glint. "There may be reasons to remain in town a while longer." Eleanor understood her father's implication perfectly. Despite the torrent of gossip and speculation, no formal understanding had yet been established between her and Alaric. If she wished to see where their renewed connection might truly lead, remaining in London would be necessary. "I defer to your judgment, father," she said diplomatically, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. Lord Vance smiled knowingly. "Very well, we shall stay through August at least." Eleanor's heart gave a hopeful, yet cautious leap. The battle for Alaric's affections, and for her own future, was far from over. Later that evening, as Eleanor stood with Clara near the refreshment table, a welcome respite from the swirling emotions of the ballroom, Mr. Julian Croft approached them. "Lady Clara." He greeted her politely, his eyes, however, fixed on Eleanor. "Might I borrow your sister for a brief promenade around the room?" Clara, ever perceptive and sensing the need for a private conversation, nodded graciously. "I believe Lady Forsyte was just asking for my opinion on the new draperies," she said with a knowing smile, before engaging the older woman in conversation, allowing Eleanor and Julian a moment of relative privacy. "You seem happy, Eleanor," Julian observed as they walked slowly along the perimeter of the ballroom, his gaze gentle and searching. "Happier than when you left for Derbyshire." Eleanor glanced at him, touched by his genuine concern for her well-being, despite his own obvious feelings. "I am more at peace, Julian. Perhaps the Duke has made amends then." Julian's expression was carefully neutral, but Eleanor sensed the wistful undertone. "We have reached a better understanding," Eleanor acknowledged, though much remains unresolved. Julian nodded thoughtfully. "And the Countess? She appears determined to cause difficulty." "Yes," Eleanor sighed, the memory of Isolde's possessive grip and Alaric's rigid posture still fresh. "Though Alaric insists there is nothing between them." "For what it's worth," Julian said after a moment, his voice quiet but firm, "I believe him. I've observed them together this evening. She pursues, he retreats. It's quite obvious to anyone paying attention." Eleanor was surprised by this support from such an unexpected quarter. "That's perceptive of you, Julian," he smiled ruefully. "I may be biased in your favor, Lady Eleanor, but I am not blind." The Duke looks at you the way he paused, then continued quietly. "The way I imagine I look at you, with admiration, respect, and profound attachment." The honest admission touched Eleanor deeply. "Julian, Please," he interrupted gently. "No explanations are needed. I told you before that your friendship matters to me above all." "That remains true." Eleanor impulsively squeezed his hand. "You are a good man, Julian Croft. I am fortunate to know you." As Eleanor and Julian completed their circuit of the room, they encountered Duke Alaric Beaumont, who had finally extricated himself from the Countess Isolde Blackwood's persistent company. His expression was carefully neutral as he observed their momentarily joined hands, though Eleanor quickly released her hold on Julian's arm. "Your Grace," Julian greeted him cordially, with his usual impeccable grace. "I was just returning Lady Eleanor to her sister's side." "Mr. Croft," Alaric acknowledged, his gaze shifting between them for a brief, intense moment before settling on Eleanor. "Might I have a word with Lady Eleanor afterward?" "Of course," Julian replied, bowing slightly to Eleanor before departing with a dignity that spoke volumes. Once they were relatively private, a quiet corner affording them a small measure of discretion, Alaric spoke quietly, but intently. "I apologize for the interruption earlier. The Countess can be persistent." "So I've observed," Eleanor replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from her tone. Alaric's expression softened, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes before it was replaced by seriousness. "Eleanor, what I was trying to ask before—" "Not here," she interrupted gently, aware of the curious glances still directed their way, even from a distance. "Too many eyes, Too many ears. Alaric nodded in understanding, his jaw tightening slightly in a familiar gesture of controlled impatience. "Tomorrow, then," he proposed, his voice low. "Would you walk with me in the park? Early, before the fashionable hour?" Eleanor considered the request. A morning walk would afford them privacy, while remaining entirely proper, with the presence of other early visitors and gardeners. It was a risk, but one she felt compelled to take. "Yes," she agreed, her heart quickening. "At 9. 9 it is," Alaric confirmed, relief evident in his features. "Until tomorrow, then." The following morning dawned bright and clear, promising a beautiful day. Eleanor, dressed with particular care in a walking dress of pale blue muslin, simple yet elegant. Clara helped arrange her hair, a knowing smile playing about her lips. "You think he means to propose today, don't you?" she asked as she secured a final pin. "I think he means to speak privately," Eleanor corrected, though a flutter of anticipation stirred in her chest. "What will be said remains to be seen." Clara's expression grew serious. "And if he does propose, what will you answer?" Eleanor met her sister's gaze in the mirror. "I don't know, Clara. My heart says one thing, my caution another." "For what it's worth," Clara said thoughtfully, "I believe he truly loves you. The way he looks at you, it's as if the sun rises and sets with you alone." Touched by her sister's romantic observation, Eleanor smiled. "When did my practical little sister become such a poet?" "Perhaps I've been reading too many novels." Clara laughed, adjusting a curl at Eleanor's temple. "There, you look perfect." Eleanor found Alaric waiting when she arrived at Hyde Park, his tall figure instantly recognizable even at a distance. As she approached, she noted that he seemed unusually tense, his posture rigid, and his expression preoccupied. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Is something wrong? You seem troubled." Alaric took her hands, propriety momentarily forgotten in his agitation. "Eleanor, I've just come from my solicitor. The jury has reached a verdict in Blackwood's case." "So quickly?" Eleanor was surprised. "What was the outcome?" "Guilty on all charges of fraud and embezzlement," Alaric replied, a stark satisfaction evident in his tone. "He's to be imprisoned for 15 years. "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said warmly, genuinely relieved. "You must be relieved." "I am," Alaric agreed, though a shadow still lingered in his eyes. "But there's more. During final testimony yesterday, new evidence emerged, evidence I wasn't aware of until this morning." "Regarding your father's death?" Eleanor guessed, noting the mixture of emotions playing across Alaric's features. Relief, but also a deep, familiar pain. "Yes." Alaric guided her to a secluded bench beneath a spreading elm tree. One of Blackwood's former clerks came forward. He testified that Blackwood had paid a groom to tamper with my father's saddle before his fatal ride. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "So it truly was murder, not an accident?" "Not precisely murder in the legal sense," Alaric clarified, his voice tight with controlled emotion. The clerk couldn't prove Blackwood intended death rather than injury, but certainly criminal interference that resulted in death. The groom in question died years ago, so his testimony is lost, but the clerk's evidence was enough to add a charge of criminal negligence causing death to Blackwood's sentence. "Oh, Alaric," Eleanor whispered, squeezing his hands. "I'm so sorry about your father, but grateful that justice has finally been served." Alaric nodded, his expression clearing slightly, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "It feels like the conclusion of a chapter that's been unfinished for too long. My father can rest easier now. And He paused, meeting her gaze directly, the intensity of his dark eyes holding hers. "I can look to the future instead of the past." The significance of his words hung in the air between them, a silent declaration of a new beginning. Eleanor felt her heart quicken, a wave of understanding washing over her. Alaric shifted to face her more directly, his voice deepening with emotion. "Eleanor, When I began investigating Blackwood, I allowed that pursuit to overshadow everything else in my life, including what was most precious to me." He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture of agitation and vulnerability. "I convinced myself I was protecting you by pushing you away, but in truth, I was protecting myself from the terror of loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy me." His confession, raw and honest, laid bare the true cost of his misguided actions and the depth of his fear. "Alaric," Eleanor began, her voice soft with dawning comprehension, but he gently placed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this properly." He took a deep, steadying breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "These past weeks, seeing you again, explaining myself, spending time together at Silvercourt, have shown me what truly matters. Justice for my father was important, yes, but not at the cost of happiness, of connection, of love." He released her hands only to reach into his coat, withdrawing a small velvet box. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening as he opened it to reveal a ring of exceptional beauty, a central sapphire, deep as the ocean, surrounded by sparkling diamonds, all set in gleaming platinum. "This was my grandmother's," Alaric explained softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It has been passed down through generations of Beaumont duchesses. I can think of no one more worthy to wear it than you." With perfect grace, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, heedless of the dew-dampened grass. "Eleanor Elizabeth Vance," he began, his voice firm and unwavering, yet laced with a vulnerability that pierced her very soul. "I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, though I was too tongue-tied to speak. I have loved you through our separation, though I foolishly believed distance would diminish the feeling. I will love you for all the days of my life if you will do me the profound honor of becoming my wife." Tears shimmered in Eleanor's eyes as she looked down at Alaric, this proud, complicated man who had hurt her deeply, and then worked tirelessly to make amends, laying his heart bare before her. In his face, she saw not only love and hope, but also vulnerability and the fear of rejection, a mirror of her own journey. "Before I answer," Eleanor said gently, her voice thick with emotion, "I need to know one thing." She met his earnest gaze, her own unwavering. "If faced with similar circumstances again, a threat, a danger, a difficult choice that affects us both, would you make decisions alone, or would you trust me to stand beside you? To share the burden and the truth?" Alaric's gaze never wavered, his answer immediate and resolute. "I would trust you with everything, my fears, my doubts, my vulnerabilities. I have learned, Eleanor, that true protection comes not from pushing away those we love, but from standing together against whatever challenges arise. I would not, could not, bear to face such a thing without you by my side again." His answer, so honest and complete, dissolved the last of Eleanor's reservations, washing away the lingering pain of the past year. A profound sense of peace settled over her heart, replacing caution with certainty. "Then yes, Alaric Beaumont," she said softly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, her voice ringing with conviction. "I will marry you, not because you are a duke, or because society expects it, but because I love you, the man you truly are beneath the title, and I trust you." Joy transformed Alaric's features, a radiant, unburdened happiness that made his face alight. With tender reverence, he slipped the sapphire ring onto her finger, its cool weight a sweet promise. Then, rising from his knee, he sat beside her once more, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her, a kiss that spoke of promises kept, of a future shared, and of a love that had been tested and emerged stronger. When they finally parted, a soft gasp escaped Eleanor's lips, and she smiled through happy tears, her hand still resting on his cheek. "We should return," she murmured, her voice a little breathless. "Father will be waiting for your formal request." Alaric nodded, his eyes alight with triumph and adoration as he helped her to her feet. "And after that," he said, his hand still gently clasping hers, "I thought perhaps we might announce our engagement at Lady Winchester's dinner tomorrow evening." "That seems fitting," given where our journey began." "That seems perfect," Eleanor agreed, her heart soaring with anticipation. "Though I imagine the Countess will not take the news well." Alaric's expression turned serious, a brief, hard glint in his eyes. "Isolde has already departed London. My solicitor informed me this morning that she left for her country estate immediately after hearing the verdict in her uncle's case." He paused, a wry twist to his lips. "I suspect we've seen the last of her in society circles for some time." Relief washed over Eleanor, a palpable easing of the tension she hadn't realized she still carried. While she had never truly doubted Alaric's feelings, the Countess's persistent presence had been a lingering shadow over their renewed connection. With Isolde removed from the stage, their path forward seemed clearer, unburdened by further public machinations. As they walked back through the park, arm in arm, the sapphire glittering on Eleanor's finger, a comfortable silence fell between them. It was not the tense silence of their initial encounters, nor the guarded quiet of their early reconciliation, but a peaceful quietude, filled with unspoken understanding and the profound joy of a shared future. Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, heartbroken and bewildered by Alaric's abandonment, she could never have imagined that they would find their way back to each other. She had weathered pain, navigated uncertainty, and faced danger, and through it all, she had discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She realized now that perhaps they had needed that time apart, that crucible of pain, to truly understand what they meant to each other. That explanation, understanding, and forgiveness would heal what had been broken, forging a bond stronger than before. Lord Vance received their news with evident satisfaction, a rare, unreserved smile gracing his usually reserved features. He granted his blessing immediately, extending a hand to Alaric. "I've watched you these past weeks, Beaumont," he said, his gaze discerning. "You've proven yourself a man of principle and integrity, despite past mistakes. I entrust my daughter's happiness to you gladly." Alaric bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I will endeavor to be worthy of your trust, and Eleanor's." Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude for her father's perceptiveness and his unwavering support. His approval, so genuinely given, was a final affirmation of their choice, a familial blessing that sealed their future. Clara, upon hearing the news, embraced her sister with unrestrained joy, her eyes shining. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, her voice barely a whisper in Eleanor's ear. "From the moment he looked at you at Lady Rothel's ball, I knew this day would come. You never stopped loving him, did you?" Eleanor laughed, a soft, happy sound. "No, Clara, I never did." It was a confession made easily now, in the warmth of her sister's embrace, the truth undeniable. The announcement at Lady Winchester's dinner the following evening created precisely the sensation they had anticipated. Congratulations poured in, along with knowing smiles from those who claimed to have suspected all along that a reconciliation was imminent. The room buzzed with a mixture of delight and thinly veiled curiosity. Mr. Julian Croft approached the newly engaged couple with genuine goodwill, though Eleanor detected a hint of sadness behind his smile, a wistful acknowledgment of what might have been. "I wish you both every happiness," he said sincerely, extending his hand to Alaric, then turning to Eleanor. "You deserve it, Lady Eleanor." "Thank you, Julian," she replied warmly, her voice full of heartfelt appreciation. "Your friendship means a great deal to us both." He offered a slight, dignified bow before moving away, leaving Eleanor with a renewed sense of respect for his steadfast character. In the weeks that followed, preparations for the wedding consumed much of Eleanor's time, a joyful flurry of fittings, consultations, and guest lists. Alaric, ever thoughtful, suggested a ceremony at Silvercourt's ancient chapel, followed by celebrations that would include not only London society but the estate tenants and villagers as well. "I want everyone who depends on Silvercourt to share in our happiness," he explained, his gaze warm, "and to meet their future Duchess." Eleanor was deeply touched by his inclusivity, by his desire to bridge the gap between their two worlds. "That sounds perfect," she said, her hand reaching for his. "A true beginning to our life together." On a golden autumn day in October, exactly 1 year and 4 months after Alaric had first disappeared from Eleanor's life, They stood together before the altar of Silver Court's ancient chapel. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace that had belonged to her mother, a symbol of continuity and enduring love. Alaric, in his formal attire, cut a striking figure, his eyes fixed solely on her. As they spoke their vows, promises of love, fidelity, and partnership, Eleanor felt the last vestiges of past hurt dissolve, replaced by the certainty that what had once been broken had been remade stronger than before. I, Alaric James Beaumont, take thee, Eleanor Elizabeth Vance, to be my wedded wife. Alaric's voice was steady and clear, his gaze never leaving hers. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. When Eleanor repeated her vows, her voice rang with equal conviction. This was no fairy tale ending, but the beginning of a partnership founded on mutual respect, understanding, and a love tempered by challenge and adversity. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers in the great hall of Silver Court, a vibrant scene of laughter and celebration, Alaric leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Are you happy, Your Grace?" he asked, using her new title with evident pleasure, his breath warm against her temple. Eleanor smiled up at him, her heart full, the sapphire on her finger gleaming. "Completely, my love, though I suspect our greatest happiness still lies ahead." "Indeed," Alaric agreed, his eyes alight with love and promise, a silent testament to the journey they had completed, and the one they were just beginning. "We have a lifetime to discover it together." Later, as twilight softened the Derbyshire landscape, the Duke and Duchess of Beaumont slipped away from the celebrations, seeking a moment of quiet solitude. They found themselves on the terrace overlooking the lake, the very spot that had witnessed their reconciliation months earlier. "When I saw you again that night at Lady Rothel's ball," Alaric mused, his arm around Eleanor's waist, drawing her close, "I never dared hope we would end here." "Nor I," Eleanor admitted, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But perhaps we needed that time apart, that pain, to truly understand what we mean to each other, to learn that true strength lies in shared vulnerability, not in solitary protection." Alaric turned to face her fully, framing her face with gentle hands. "I will spend every day of our lives ensuring you never regret giving me a second chance." "And I," Eleanor replied, her gaze unwavering, "will ensure you never feel you must face any challenge alone again." As they sealed this promise with a tender, lingering kiss, the first stars appeared above Silver Court, twinkling like diamonds in the deepening indigo sky, witnesses to a love that had overcome betrayal, separation, and doubt to emerge stronger and more enduring than before. 5 years later, the nursery at Silver Court was awash in morning sunlight as Duchess Eleanor Beaumont entered to find her husband, Alaric, cradling their infant son, James Henry. Their 3-year-old daughter, Lady Eleanor, whom they affectionately called Ella, solemnly presented her father with a wooden horse. "It's for baby James," she explained with the grave importance only a child can muster, holding the toy aloft, "so he can practice for when he's big enough to ride Peppa." Alaric accepted the offering with equal seriousness, a tender smile touching his lips. Eleanor smiled from the doorway, her heart full at the sight of her family. The past 5 years had brought challenges, certainly, the management of a vast estate, the expectations placed upon a duchess, the delicate balance of public duties and private life, but through it all, she and Alaric had maintained the partnership they had promised each other on their wedding day. "Good morning," she said, moving into the room to kiss Ella's forehead and stroke James Henry's downy head. "I see the nursery's already quite busy." Papa was telling stories, Ella informed her importantly, scrambling onto Alaric's lap, "about when you and he didn't like each other and then did again." Eleanor raised an eyebrow at Alaric, who had the grace to look slightly abashed. A highly edited version, he assured her, his eyes twinkling. "Appropriate for young ears." "I should hope so," Eleanor laughed, lifting James Henry from his father's arms. The unabridged tale might give her rather dramatic ideas about romance. "I like the part where Papa had to say sorry lots of times," Ella declared, settling contentedly on Alaric's knee. "And you made him wait and wait before you said yes." "Wise woman, your mother," Alaric told his daughter, his eyes meeting Eleanor's over Ella's head with a warmth that still made her heart skip. Later that afternoon, as they walked together through the improved village that now boasted not only a school but a small hospital and a library, all funded by the Duke and Duchess's modernization efforts, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She and Alaric strolled hand in arm, their presence greeted by respectful nods and warm smiles from the villagers. They paused by Mrs. Jenkins, whose cottage had been among the first Alaric had improved when they visited Silver Court 5 years earlier. "Your Grace, my lady," the woman greeted them warmly, curtsying. "We were just saying what a blessing the new doctor has been. My Tommy's cough is much improved since he prescribed that syrup." "I'm delighted to hear it," Eleanor replied sincerely. "Dr. Parker came highly recommended from London. The Duke was most insistent that Silver should have the very best medical care available. And we're grateful for it, Your Grace," Mrs. Jenkins said, her weathered face creasing in a smile. "As we are for all the changes these past years." As they continued their walk, Alaric remarked, "I sometimes wonder what my father would make of all this. The school, the hospital, the modern farming methods. I think he would be proud." Eleanor said gently, squeezing his arm. "You've honored his memory not just by bringing his betrayer to justice, but by building something meaningful with the legacy he left you." Alaric nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And none of it would have been possible without you. Your vision for what Silver could become has transformed not just the estate, but me as well." Eleanor smiled up at him, her gaze tender. "We transformed each other. I think that's what partnership means. I received a letter from Clara today," she told Alaric as they strolled. "She and Lord Weston have set a date for their wedding at last, June next year." "Excellent news," Alaric replied, "though I'm surprised it took him so long to persuade her." Eleanor smiled, remembering her sister's determination to ensure her suitor's character was thoroughly proven before accepting his proposal. "Clara learned from my experience. I think she wanted certainty." "And has she found it?" Alaric asked, a gentle understanding in his eyes. "She believes so," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Though, as we know, certainty in matters of the heart is never absolute. There is always an element of faith involved." Alaric squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. "Faith well placed in your case, I hope." They paused at the village green, where children played under the watchful eyes of mothers and nursemaids. As they crested the hill overlooking the lake and the grand house beyond it, Alaric stopped, turning to face her fully. "Do you ever think about that day at Lady Rothel's ball?" he asked, his voice soft. When our eyes met across the room, and everything else seemed to fade away. "Often," Eleanor admitted, her gaze distant as she recalled the memory. "It was a turning point, though I didn't recognize it then. I knew in that moment that I had made the greatest mistake of my life in leaving you," Alaric said quietly, reaching up to gently touch her cheek, "and that I would do whatever was necessary to earn a second chance." Eleanor reached up to touch his cheek, her heart full of the love that had deepened and matured through years of shared joys, challenges, and growth. "Some would say we were fortunate," she mused, "that few who are parted as we were find their way back to each other." "Not fortune," Alaric corrected her gently, his gaze unwavering. "Choice. Every day we choose each other anew. That's the true meaning of 'till death us do part.' Not a single vow made once, but a promise renewed with each sunrise." Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes shining with profound affection. "I choose you today," she said, echoing the private renewal they had made a tradition on each anniversary, "and all the days to come." "And I choose you," Alaric replied, drawing her close. "Today and always." As the afternoon light gilded Silver Court in the distance, the Duke and Duchess stood together on the hillside, their shared past behind them, their future stretching out before them. Together they turned toward home, where their children awaited, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them as they had faced all others. Side by side, hand in hand, hearts aligned in perfect understanding. The story ended, not with a sigh of relief, but with the quiet strength of enduring love, trust, and partnership. A few months after the Beaumonts' wedding, Countess Isolde Blackwood sat alone in the faded grandeur of her country estate, the silence of the vast rooms, a stark contrast to the lively London seasons she once commanded. A society column lay crumpled on the floor, announcing the Duke and Duchess of Beaumont's return to Silver Court after their honeymoon. She had discarded it in disgust, the elegant script a fresh wound. Foolish, naive girl, she thought bitterly, to believe such a charade could last. She reflected on her failed schemes, the cunning plans that had unraveled with Silas's arrest and Alaric's unwavering commitment to Eleanor. Her maid, Bessie, entered with a fresh pot of tea, her movements quiet. Bessie had long grown accustomed to Isolde's perpetual foul mood since her uncle's arrest and the Duke's humiliating public engagement. "Will that be all, your ladyship?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Isolde merely waved a dismissive hand, her eyes fixed on nothing, her heart a cold, hard knot of resentment. A year after the Beaumonts' wedding, Mr. Julian Crofts sat in his London townhouse study, discussing estate matters with Lord Vance. Their friendship, forged in shared concern for Eleanor, had deepened over time. Julian had maintained his close ties with the Vance family, often offering his sensible counsel. "Eleanor seems remarkably happy," Lord Vance observed, a fond smile on his face. "And Alaric, too. He's a changed man." Julian nodded, a genuine smile gracing his lips, though a flicker of sadness remained in his kind eyes. "They deserve every happiness, my lord. Their path was not an easy one." Lord Vance clapped him on the shoulder. "And you, Julian, have been a steadfast friend through it all. Your unwavering integrity and friendship are a rare commodity." Julian merely offered a modest shrug, accepting the compliment with quiet dignity. He had found his own contentment in contributing to the happiness of those he cared for, even if his heart's deepest desire remained unfulfilled. At Lord Weston's country estate, a flurry of activity surrounded Lady Clara Vance and her fiancé, Lord Weston, as they oversaw the final preparations for their own wedding. Scrolls of fabric, floral arrangements, and guest lists lay spread across a grand table. Lord Weston took Clara's hand, his gaze adoring. "My dearest Clara, I confess I never thought I would finally win your hand. Your scrutiny of my character was, shall we say, thorough." Clara laughed, a radiant sound. "And rightly so, my lord. I learned from the best. I needed to ensure my choice was built on absolute certainty and trust." Lord Weston squeezed her hand. "And have I passed the test, then?" "With flying colors," she assured him, her smile brimming with genuine happiness. "I have no doubt our life together will be as joyous as it is honorable." In a grim London prison a few years later, Silas Blackwood languished in his cell. His once cunning features were now etched with bitterness and defeat, his eyes holding a perpetually resentful gleam. A guard passed by, his heavy boots echoing in the corridor, pausing briefly to observe the notorious prisoner. "Still unrepentant, that one," the guard muttered to himself before continuing his rounds. Silas, oblivious or uncaring of the observation, muttered to himself, his voice a low, rasping sound. "Lost opportunities, all because of that meddling Duke and his precious Eleanor. My grand schemes thwarted by sentiment." His grand machinations, once so potent, were now reduced to impotent rage within the confines of his stone cell, his power permanently curtailed. At a bustling London tea party a few years after the Beaumonts' wedding, Lady Seraphina Croft and Lady Worthington found themselves discussing the Duke and Duchess of Beaumont. Lady Worthington, now radiating admiration rather than avid curiosity, sipped her tea. "Their story, my dear Seraphina, is truly a romance for the ages. To think of all they overcame." She seemed to have conveniently forgotten her own eager participation in the past gossip. Seraphina smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Indeed, Worthington." It proves that truth has a way of revealing itself, eventually. It was a subtle nod to Julian's earlier concerns, and the complex path that had led Eleanor and Alaric to their hard-won happiness, a testament to the enduring power of their love story. At Cambridge, several years after Silas Blackwood's trial, Leo Harding, now a successful scholar, stood in a grand university hall, receiving accolades for his groundbreaking research. He reflected on the unwavering support of Duke Alaric Beaumont, his former guardian, and the justice brought for his father. That act of courage had allowed him to pursue his studies in peace, unburdened by the shadows of the past. Later, in his quiet rooms, he penned a grateful letter to Alaric, expressing his enduring respect and deep affection. The Duke's commitment to justice had not only healed his own family's wounds, but had also paved the way for Leo's own bright future. On a bright afternoon, Eleanor and Alaric rode along the winding paths of Silver Court, their daughter, Ella, now 5, expertly guiding her pony beside them. "Look, Papa!" Ella exclaimed, her small hand pointing excitedly to a newly cleared trail through a copse of ancient trees. "You made a new path here?" Alaric smiled, his gaze full of paternal pride. "Indeed, little one. We thought it was time to explore new routes." Eleanor watched him patiently guide Ella, her heart filled with a profound gratitude for their peaceful life, for the laughter that echoed through the woods, and for the man who had built this beautiful world with her. Later that evening, Eleanor sat in the sun-drenched nursery, holding her infant son, James Henry, gazing at his tiny, sleeping face. She stroked his soft hair, a silent vow forming in her heart. He would grow up in a home where honesty was paramount, where trust was never broken for any reason, no matter how noble the intention. He would know the strength of standing together. Alaric entered quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick rug, and stood for a moment, simply watching her. A shared understanding, deep and unspoken, passed between them. He knew the weight of her promise, and he honored it. In the drawing-room of Silver Court, the firelight flickered cheerfully, casting warm glows on the rich furnishings. Eleanor played a gentle melody on the pianoforte, her fingers dancing across the keys. Beside her, Ella, her head tilted, attempted to sing along, her voice a little off-key but filled with joyful abandon. Alaric watched them from his armchair, a look of profound contentment on his face, the day's responsibilities momentarily forgotten. Eleanor glanced up, catching his eye across the room, and they shared a silent smile, a testament to their enduring love and the tranquil harmony of their life. Eleanor and Alaric walked hand in hand to the sheltered cove by the lake, their special place, where the ancient oak tree spread its massive branches. They sat on the familiar stone bench, the dappled sunlight on the water a peaceful backdrop. "Do you remember our first walk here?" Eleanor asked softly, a nostalgic smile on her lips. "And how you confessed you used to hide from your tutors?" Alaric chuckled. "Indeed. Those were simpler days, though perhaps not as rich." He gently took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I still recall every word we spoke here, every touch, and my deep love and gratitude for your second chance grows with each passing year." As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple over Silver Court, Eleanor and Alaric stood on the terrace, overlooking their vast estate. Alaric put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, feeling utterly at peace. They spoke of their future, not as a fairy tale, but as a dynamic partnership, built on the solid foundations of trust, honesty, and shared purpose. They had learned that love was not merely a feeling, but a deliberate choice, made and remade every day. As the last rays of sunlight faded, they embraced, ready for whatever life might bring. Together, their figures silhouetted against the deepening twilight. The breakfast room at Silver Court buzzed with happy chatter. Ella, now 5, regaled her parents with an elaborate dream involving flying ponies and chocolate trees. Alaric, a picture of tender fatherhood, patiently helped a giggling James Henry with his porridge, wiping a stray drop from his chin. Eleanor watched them, a deep sense of contentment and peace settling over her. This everyday warmth, this domestic bliss, was the hard-won prize of their journey, a harmony she cherished more than any societal acclaim. Laughter filled the sunlit room, a melody of their shared happiness. Eleanor and Alaric attended the lively annual village fair, mingling effortlessly with tenants and villagers who greeted them with genuine warmth and respect. Children darted amongst the stalls, their faces sticky with sweets. A young woman, barely older than Ella, approached Eleanor shyly. "Your Grace," she began, curtsying, "I wanted to thank you for the new library. My children now love to read, and it's made such a difference." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "It is our pleasure, Mrs. Davies. An educated mind is a treasure." The fair was a vibrant testament to their shared vision and the prosperity they had fostered in their community. In the quiet sanctuary of Silvercourt's library, a fire glowed softly in the hearth. Eleanor and Alaric sat together, each engrossed in a book, the comfortable silence a testament to their deep intimacy. Without looking up from his page, Alaric reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Eleanor smiled, a silent gesture of love and companionship passing between them. Content in their shared quiet, surrounded by the wisdom of centuries, they found a profound peace, a bond that transcended words and spoke of a love intellectually fulfilling and emotionally profound. Alaric's study was a hub of purposeful activity. Eleanor sat opposite him, maps and documents spread across the imposing mahogany desk as they reviewed estate plans. They discussed new agricultural methods, potential community projects, and the allocation of resources. Eleanor offered insightful suggestions, which Alaric valued and incorporated into their strategy. They worked as a seamless team, their minds aligned in their commitment to Silvercourt and its people. A shared smile passed between them as they successfully navigated a complex budget, their partnership extending far beyond matters of the heart to the very foundation of their life together. Eleanor walked through the formal gardens, pushing James Henry in his elegant pram. The scent of roses filled the air as she pointed out the vibrant blooms, talking softly to her infant son. "Look, James," she murmured, "a lady's slipper. Your papa planted these for me." A gardener trimming a rose bush nearby paused to bow respectfully, admiring the Duchess and the young heir. Eleanor, a picture of serene motherhood, felt a profound joy in these simple moments, a gentle contentment that had replaced the anxious uncertainty of her earlier years. Ella, bright-eyed and curious, visited the bustling village schoolhouse, a sturdy stone building her parents had commissioned. She watched the children learning their letters and numbers, her own education well underway at home. "My papa and mama built this school," she proudly told the school teacher, a kind woman named Miss Amelia. The teacher smiled warmly. "Indeed, Lady Eleanor, we are all deeply grateful to your parents for their commitment to education. Every child here now has a chance to learn, thanks to their grace." Ella beamed, understanding the legacy her family was creating. In the stables of Silvercourt, the rich scent of hay and horses filled the air. Alaric inspected a new foal, a spirited little creature discussing its breeding with the head groom. His knowledge and passion for his horses were evident in his gentle touch and keen questions. The head groom, a grizzled man who had served the Beaumont family for decades, remarked, "His Grace is a true horseman, like his father before him, knows every beast on the estate by heart." Alaric merely nodded, his quiet strength and dedication connecting him deeply to the traditions and rhythms of his home. After the children were asleep, Eleanor and Alaric relaxed by the crackling fire in the drawing room. Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder, the soft fabric of his evening coat a comforting presence. Alaric gently kissed her hair, a silent gesture of deep affection. They spoke of nothing in particular, simply content in each other's presence. The quiet intimacy, a precious balm after a busy day. Their love, once tumultuous, had matured into a peaceful, profound affection, a quiet understanding that needed no words. The orchard at Silvercourt was a picture of autumn bounty laden with ripe apples. Eleanor, Alaric, and Ella were there, enjoying the harvest. Ella laughed joyfully as Alaric lifted her high onto his shoulders so she could reach a particularly red apple. Eleanor gathered the fallen fruit into a wicker basket, her heart full of the simple joys of their life together. The sun, warm on her face, the sweet scent of apples, and the sound of her family's laughter filled her with a profound sense of contentment and abundance. In the soft glow of the nursery lamp, Eleanor sat in the rocking chair, gently swaying as she cradled James Henry to sleep. She sang a soft lullaby, the melody a sweet, murmuring sound, and stroked his downy hair. The peace and love in the room were palpable, a quiet symphony of maternal bliss. As his breathing deepened into sleep, Eleanor kissed his forehead, her heart overflowing with the profound, unconditional love of a mother. After the children were tucked into their beds, Eleanor and Alaric took an evening stroll through the formal gardens. The moonlight cast long shadows, and the night air was cool and fragrant. They discussed their day, the children's latest antics, and the ongoing improvements to the estate. Alaric squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgment of their enduring partnership, their intertwined fingers, a testament to their unbreakable bond. Their conversation flowed easily, a comfortable rhythm of shared thoughts and dreams, reflecting the deep connection that defined their marriage. Eleanor tucked Ella into bed, listening to her tell a convoluted story about a princess and a prince who were separated by a dragon but found each other again. "Mama," Ella asked, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity, "does true love always tell the truth?" Eleanor smiled, smoothing her daughter's hair. "Yes, my dearest Ella," she assured her. "True love always tells the truth. Eventually, because trust is the strongest magic of all." She kissed Ella goodnight, her heart full of the lessons learned and the wisdom passed on, ensuring her daughter would grow up with a clear understanding of what real love entailed. Eleanor and Alaric stood on the terrace, watching the sunset cast long golden shadows over Silver Court. The majestic house, now truly their home, glowed warmly in the fading light. Alaric put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, feeling utterly at peace, his presence a comforting anchor. They shared a silent, knowing look, a testament to their love, tested by fire, and emerged stronger. The golden hues of the sunset, stretching across the Derbyshire landscape, seemed to reflect the beauty and resilience of their hard-won happiness, a lasting symbol of their enduring partnership. Alaric gently turned to Eleanor to face him, cupping her face in his hands. His eyes, deep and full of love, met hers. "Today and always, my love," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, a renewal of the vow they made daily. Eleanor's eyes shone with unshed tears of joy. "Always and forever," she replied, her voice soft but firm. They kissed, a tender, lifelong promise, as the first stars twinkled into existence above Silver Court, silent witnesses to a love that had overcome betrayal, separation, and doubt to emerge stronger and more enduring than before. Their journey had ended, but their story, their legacy of love and trust, had only just begun.